Good evening, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6 o'clock, so I will open the meeting. Welcome to everyone to this meeting of Derbyshire Dale District Council's Planning Committee. My name's Councillor Sue Burfoot. I am the Vice Chair of the Planning Committee, but we have two co-chairs, neither of whom can be here tonight. So I will be chairing the meeting. On my right, if I can just introduce people, we've got Chris Whitmore, who's the Development Manager. We've got Adam Maxwell, who's Principal Planning Officer. To my left is Kerry France, our Solicitor. And we've got Tommy Short, who's in charge of the recording. I should say at this point that this meeting will be recorded. If you don't wish to be have your image on that on the film, please let us know. Angela at the back is part of Democratic Services as well. I am going to say just something in that our Principal Planning Officer, Adam, here, it is his last meeting. I have great respect for Adam in the work that he's done since he's been at Derbyshire Dales. He was previously at the Peak Park, and I'm afraid they've pinched him back to be their Chief Planning Officer. So all the best to you, Adam, and thank you for everything that you've done. There isn't a fire alarm tonight planned, so if the fire alarm does go off, it is for real. So please be aware of where the emergency exits are. There are toilets downstairs and out of this door to my left, and there is water available as well. So if we can start with the meeting, please. First of all, Angela, item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Got apologies from Councillor David Burton, Councillor Peter O'Brien, Councillor Robert Archer, Councillor Laura Melstrom and Councillor Mark Wakeman, and substitutes Councillor Marilyn Franks and Councillor Kelda Boothroyd.
Thank you. Item 2 is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Now, there has been an email from Councillor Peter O'Brien, who was in the chair at the last meeting, and he has made the point that we should be looking at these minutes, particularly if you look, members, on page 11, at the bottom of page 11. That was the Halldale Quarry application. I am going to ask Chris if he can just explain to us whether a true, well, the committee are going to decide whether it's a true record, but...
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor O'Brien has, in his email to the chairs of this meeting, put the following comment to them. The amended recommendation was voted on and agreed, and was not that a note should be attached to the approval relating to affordable housing. It was that the council should use its resources to negotiate with the developer for the provision of affordable housing. Now, I've listened to the meeting, and I know that our committee team has as well. Now, Councillor O'Brien, he did chair that meeting, and his comment was, whilst we can add your proposal as a note, I don't think we can accept it as a condition of any decision. Now, any minutes and any amendment to a motion must be acceptable in planning terms. My position on this is that we have no remit or ability or power to enter into negotiations which discuss the provision of affordable housing on a development that's already been considered, and that matter's already been addressed through the planning process. My advice is that an advisory footnote to the effect that the applicant is encouraged to enter in discussions with officers to look at ways in which we can deliver affordable housing on the site is an appropriate way forward, because we can't control that happens through condition, and there's no other means in which we can do what Councillor O'Brien has requested within the planning arena. Hence why I'm happy with with an advisory footnote here, and I think that's an accurate reflection of the motion that was voted on. Happy to take any questions on that.
Councillor Dobbs and Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Is not the wording that was proposed by Councillor O'Brien to use its resources? So that would be, if the resources had limitations, then that would be taken care of, would it not?
It would, but in terms of clarity for the applicant, as a footnote, what we can state is that the applicant's encouraged to engage with us, put them in contact with a relevant officer of the council, and explore ways in which we can deliver affordable housing, whether that's through Homes England or the revenue streams that are open or the funding mechanisms, and to fully explore those with council officers rather than through the planning process itself.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, before we got footnotes going in, but previous to that, did they refuse to abide with affordable housing, the applicant?
Circumstances are that the application that was before members was an approval of reserved matters, so affordable housing had already been considered when the outline planning permission had been approved at committee. So that particular issue had been discussed and agreed at the outline stage. So approval of reserved matters stage, we're unable to revisit that particular issue, hence why a condition or an ability to re-enter into discussions on affordable housing wasn't possible, and that's reflected in the minutes of that particular meeting.
That goes back a few years, doesn't it, now, when the permission was first given, outline?
Yes, it's some years ago, but it was an extant permission.
Yeah, is there, just out of curiosity, is there a length of time when, from outline to, 4 or 5 years? And then it has to be applied for again?
Yeah, so when you grant outline permission, there's a 3-year period within which you have to submit all approval of reserved matters, and then following the final approval of reserved matters, a 2-year period then to build out the development.
Because it must have been well over that time.
Yes, the application was made, and the approval of reserved matters application that was voted on was a 2000 application, so it was a 20 prefix to the application reference. But the application was made within the 3-year period, so it was a valid application in that respect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm willing to move, recommend a change in the wording in accordance with the wording that Chris Whitmore used just now. But before I do that, I'd like to just say that we had some advice subsequent to the meeting that it would be possible to change the conditions associated with affordable housing in reserved matters, in a reserved matters application, irrespective of what had been said at outline stage, given the different circumstances of the reserved matter application, and particularly as the cost of the scheme was going to be £6 million less to the developer. Chris, would you be able to comment on that?
Yes, my position is that any conditions imposed on approval of reserved matters application relating to affordable housing wouldn't meet the tests for conditions. It's not necessary in respect or reasonable to impose such conditions on an application that considers matters of detail rather than the principle and the fundamentals of the application that's been considered.
So a condition for affordable housing, or the imposition of affordable housing, would be done. Section 106 would be done at outline stage, not at and wouldn't then happen at reserved matters phase.
Yeah, such matters should be dealt with at outline stage.
Can you outline the things that can be considered at reserved matters stage then, for the benefit of the committee? Matters
relating to the approval of reserved matters. So it depends what matters were reserved, but approval of reserved matters tend to be are access, layout, appearance, scale, and landscaping. So it's matters of detail.
Right, okay. Drainage strategies?
I think this is probably not
Okay,
for
all
now.
right. All right, well, in
Councillor
that case,
Hughes.
I'd like to
Yeah.
move that we I propose a change in wording in accordance with Chris Whitmore's suggestion, which is that the council considers negotiating with the developer on the provision of affordable housing.
Before I ask for a seconder for that, Councillor Buttle
Um,
and then Councillor Slack.
Thank you very much. I was there, and I remember that discussion was fairly clear that we accepted that maybe some questions about the viability of the site, and so therefore we accepted that the amount of affordable housing was what we had to live with that was being offered. We accepted that, but we also wanted to know whether or not it would be possible for us to approach the developer to ask for some more affordable housing and for us to pay them to provide it. That's pretty much what we did. Now, I don't think this wording on on the minutes actually accurately reflects that. I realise that the minutes are talking about conditions, and this was not a condition. This was just a request by the chair and a couple of other people that our principal development people were to go forward and ask whether or not something could be done. So I'm not quite sure where we stand with this. Are we arguing about something that should be here, or should something that shouldn't be here?
I think the minutes reflect exactly what you've just said, Councillor Buttle, in that we're not suggesting a condition. We're suggesting that an advisory footnote was imposed to encourage the delivery of affordable housing. So I think that achieves exactly the objective that you just set out in your address to members.
I'm going to have to trust you on that because, yeah, like you're the one that is the expert on these wordings.
Councillor Lees, and then I am going to ask for.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, it was myself, and I moved the recommendation, and Councillor Buttle seconded it. And my recollection of this was that there was no affordable housing on this site due to the cost of the build and the development, etc. And I'm quite happy for it to have a footnote on it to encourage the delivery of affordable housing. And that's we all agreed at that particular night. It went on for some time that we missed the boat when it was the initial stages of the planning. So I'm happy as it's written by what Chris has said. Thank you.
Are you happy to second that then?
Yes.
So I am going to go to the vote. All those in favour? And against? And abstentions? So that's carried. In respect of these applications that we have in front of us tonight. So does any member want to declare an interest? Councillor Hughes.
Yes, Chair. I'm declaring an interest in the applications concerning the Market Square in Ashbourne as the chair of the Ashbourne redevelopment project.
Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm declaring an interest in application 5.2 and 5.3 as I am the applicant on that application, and also 5.9 as I'm on the project board as well with Councillor Hughes and Councillor Dobbs. So with my application being next to Marketplace, I shall be leaving the room for both of these applications. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to public. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dobbs. Sorry.
As Councillor Lees has explained, I'm on the programme board for the last bit.
Any more interest? No. So we move on to item 4, which is public participation. And obviously we have got some speakers tonight. They will have the opportunity to put forward their views to the committee. Moving on to item 5, which are the applications themselves for determination. The first one is 5.1, application number 2300229 full. That's for the residential development of 57 dwelling houses at land to the north of Jackson's-Lee, Middleton by Worksworth. Now, we do have some late reps on this one, so I am going to give members a few minutes to read them. Does anybody need more time? Are we all happy? Three speakers on this application. The first one is Mr. Paul Thorne, a local resident, to speak against the application. If you'd like to come to the desk. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your time. I have three major issues concerning the proposed development. One, the density of units is too high for the development, where 58% of the properties are 4 and 5 bedrooms. Virtually all the vehicle parking on driveways is single width, which will cause significant vehicle movement problems when it is likely the occupants for such houses will have 3+ vehicles. The private roads are only single lane, so parking on these will not be possible, as to do so will block access. There will therefore be a substantial element of public highway parking, which inevitably leads to pavement parking. This is already a problem at Jackson's-Lee, where there are no 5-bedroom properties and substantially more private driveway parking. The provision of wider public roads, footpaths on both sides of the road, doubled width private roads and double width private driveways is necessary for this development. What is proposed is totally inadequate. 2. The development will destroy a wildlife corridor that has, over the last 7 years, progressively built up on the northern edge of Jackson's-Lee. An element of this belongs to Jackson's-Lee, but this wider corridor must be retained. The developer claims retention of many trees and hedges, but subsequently, majority of these are outside the land being developed and are within Jackson's-Lee ownership. The wildlife corridor must not be allowed to be destroyed. 3. Whilst much is being made of ensuring the look of the development is in keeping with Jackson's-Lee, in reality is far from it. As an example, the Jackson's-Lee development uses random stone exterior facing, whilst the proposed development uses straight line courses. Overall, the proposal look to be a deterioration in appearance. To conclude, too big, too congested, and too shoddy. Thank you for your time.
Spot on, thank you. So the next speaker is Miss Sarah Bond, who's a local resident to speak against the application. Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I wish to object to the planning application. On this site, it's not acceptable in principle. Part of the land is in a conservation area with no existing buildings on it. Noted it's allocated land, and part is not allocated and is an open countryside with no existing buildings on it. Jackson Lees was a development of a former industrial area, so enhance the conservation area. This development would neither preserve nor enhance the conservation area and would be harmful to the character of the conservation and also to its appearance, as was noted in the Conservation Officer's report. Again, over-density. At a density of 28 dph, 1.5 times that of Jackson Lees development, this is not a modest extension as referred to by the applicant in a much smaller area. When Parcel A was included in the development plan, this was on the basis that access would be through the existing Jackson Lees estate. This is no longer possible, so a new access road is required. Additional traffic. If 57 new houses are built, you can anticipate at least 120 extra cars. Given the lack of transport that Middleton has, people will need cars. Porter Lane is a dangerous road, and where the proposed exit is a hotspot. The village lacks amenities to cope with approximately 150 to 200 additional people. There are no shops in the village, contrary to the developer's statement. To get to the nearest shop, 20 minutes walk down, up and a long hill, small pavement, not easy for the retired stroke elderly, young children, which the developers seem to be saying that this is for, as well as new families and social housing. Visual impact. The view from Middleton Top and Middleton Moor, tourist attraction, will be negatively impacted. Large housing estate versus greenfield, not ideal in a conservation area. Environmental. Impact on local wildlife. The site is next to a nature reserve, increase in noise and light pollution during construction and post-construction. Destruction of green areas, trees, natural habitats with buildings, not really environmentally friendly for a conservation area. There are other areas in the local plan that would be more appropriate, perhaps, for such a development. Harlem Mills development, that would be enhancing and restoring existing buildings, which is already in the local plan. As I say, another 57 houses increase. This is actually going to increase like the hamlet of Rise End by a cumulative of 220%. That's based on like Jackson Lee increasing it by another 100%, and then this would increase it further. So please accept my objection, and thank you for your time, Chair.
The next speaker is Mr. Darren Abbott, who's the applicant, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I'm Darren Abbott, Planning Director of the applicant and local Derbyshire house builder Woodall Homes. We're delighted to have the opportunity to further contribute to the growth and development of Derbyshire Dales, building on our recent success at Tansley and Matlock, along with our latest project due to start in the new year at Darley Dale. As detailed in the officer presentation, this is a well-related parcel of land straddling the settlement boundary of Middleton by Wirksworth, with the western part allocated for 45 dwellings in the local plan. Middleton is a Tier 3 settlement where growth beyond the market towns will be directed to ensure district's housing needs are being met. In this regard, the proposals align with the Council's adopted strategy, forming a logical and sustainable development, which would support and have access to readily available local services, facilities and amenities. The proposals have evolved over the last 18 months through extensive dialogue with the Council officers, who I must say have been excellent and are a credit to the authority. We have also presented our proposals to the Parish Council and listened carefully to the responses of consultees, both statutory and interested parties. Through these discussions, we have reduced the quantum of development from 75 units presented during pre-application engagement in spring last year to the 57 units under consideration today. There is no right of access to the development via Jackson's Lee as originally envisaged, with level changes west from Main Street proving challenging to achieve a highway design and adoptable gradient that will be supported by the County Council. The eastern parcel adjacent the allocation and Jackson's Lee development achieves a relatively level access from Porter Lane and accords with the strategic requirements of Local Plan Policy S4. Such access arrangements are supported by the County Council's highway team and ultimately facilitate delivery of this important allocation, providing the opportunity to create an attractive gateway into the village with an outward-facing active frontage whilst retaining a landscape green entrance. Through extensive discussions with planning and conservation officers who have been absolutely instrumental in the design of the eastern parcel of the site, the proposals were iteratively revised to ensure an organic layout and a grain of development that integrates well and is entirely commensurate with Jackson's Lee, whilst creating visual connections and green lungs that link between and through the developments. At circa 20 dwellings per hectare, the density is entirely consistent with neighbouring Jackson's Lee. The resultant development proposes a choice and mix of properties through a range of 1 to 5 bedroom homes, and this includes 7 bungalows, minded of the strong demand in the area, as highlighted through our local market experience and most recently sales at our Tansley site. This mix will provide for first-time buyers, families, downsizers and occupants with particular mobility requirements in the interests of a mixed and balanced communities. All house types are bespoke and have been modified through discussions with your officers to ensure their design and proportions are in keeping with the character of the surrounding area. All high-value trees are retained, with proposals delivering a policy-compliant net gain in biodiversity, and this includes 130% gain in hedgerow habitats. The attractive green spaces also include a 2-metre wide pedestrian and cycle link to Main Street, along with provision of a local play area for use by the wider community. The site's drainage scheme further incorporates the landscaping strategy through an above-ground attenuation basin, providing excellent biodiversity benefits, and includes a range of other sustainable measures such as below-ground storage tanks and flow restriction to ensure a greenfield runoff characteristic is achieved, along with considerate garden levels to allow for infiltration. The properties will offer modern, efficient housing designed to reduce energy and water consumption. We are well aware of our environmental commitments and we are taking a proactive approach to our developments, trialling, for example, latest technologies at our shrubberies development in Chesterfield, as per our conversation at the site visit yesterday. Along with EV charging points and solar with battery storage, this incorporates infrared heating with intelligent self-automation, completely removing the need for a gas boiler, for example, on that development. As modern technologies rapidly evolve, we are maintaining an open mind in this regard and will submit relevant details at the appropriate time in relation to draft condition 18. While significantly contributing to immediate delivery of an allocated housing site, the development would also help sustain the vitality of life in Middleton, along with the viability of the services and facilities it offers. For example, the County Council advised that the pupils on roll at Middleton Primary School is projected to decrease significantly during the next 5 years. In economic terms, the development includes a multi-million-pound construction spend in local supply chains, supporting a significant number of construction jobs over an expected 3-year build period, together with significant amount of direct gross added value and local spend. In conclusion, minded of the site's local plan allocation and sustainability credentials, compatibility with surrounding land uses, character of the settlement and conservation area, there's no objections from any statutory consultees, including the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and provision of robust technical evidence clearly supporting the proposals and approach applied. We would welcome your support in backing your officer recommendation to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Spot on again. Thank you. Adam, I think this is your case. To you then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before I go into the presentation, there's a couple of late reps, which was received after late reps went out. I received an email from the agents just raising a few points in regard to conditions. A typo on the reference to the flood risk assessment, one of the letters is incorrect, so that can be amended. In condition 19, the applicant, due to build out, would like the requirement for play area to be once 25% occupation. And that's to allow them to build through the site and then provide the play area in that part of the site once it's been completed. In regard to condition 20 in the western footpath, the applicant has requested that provision of that is at 50% occupation, again, for build out to once that part of the site is completed, to provision of a safe footpath. And in regard to condition 27, which is about chimneys, the applicant has requested that the wording of that is revised to allow some flexibility so that not every single building has to have a chimney, and that agreement can be sought on which particular buildings should have chimneys. And finally, my mistake, when I was reading the report earlier, I've noticed that I missed out a requirement by the Education Authority for a £4,000 contribution for stock for Worksworth Library. So in regard to the officer recommendation, tacked on to the end of the recommendation would be for a contribution of £4,000 for stock for Worksworth Library. to be included in the Section 106 legal agreement. So this application is for the erection of 57 dwellings on the site. It's a full application, so we have all the details. As can be seen on there, and as members saw on the site yesterday, the site is in an L shape and it straddles the Jackson's-Lee development on both sides. The northernmost part of the site is allocated for 45 dwellings. The part of the site which is to the east is not allocated. And also the site that is allocated is within the conservation area. And obviously the site to the west is therefore in the setting of the conservation area. The council is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply for housing, and therefore, in principle, under these circumstances, our policies allow for development of this site. The main issues, some of which have been raised, are the impact upon the setting and the conservation area itself, the impact on the landscape and visual impact. And officers have worked positively with the applicant to resolve issues about scale, design and layout, to work quite hard on a development that reflects and complements the development at Jackson's-Lee. The development would be on open fields, and inevitably there will be impact on the conservation area and its setting of building upon those fields. And we have identified that there will be some harm to the conservation area and its setting. Nevertheless, part of the site, and the part of the site that is in the conservation area, is allocated for housing, and obviously the impact on the conservation area was considered when that site was allocated. The development would result in significant public benefits, including the provision of market housing and policy-compliant affordable housing at a time when the council can't demonstrate a 5-year supply. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions set out in the report and late reps, and subject to prior entry into a legal agreement. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Councillor Hughes and Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask what material will be used for the footpaths?
Not sure that detail, well, I haven't got that detail in my head. I imagine it will be, what do you mean, the footpaths that are on the highway or the more informal footpaths?
Presumably those will be tarmac. No, the
Yeah.
ones, the other footpaths, the ones that that go through the green areas.
Yeah, I'd imagine we'd want a crushed limestone, a bound crushed limestone surface.
The experience on other developments by the same developer and other developers, and it's not only them, suggests that was not an appropriate material to use. On one of the developments referred to just recent by the applicant just now, the recent weather has resulted in gouges about this deep, a foot deep, 30 centimetres deep, in the surface of those footpaths, and will require continuous maintenance to keep them in a decent condition. And at the moment, they're a hazard, a health hazard. The same thing has happened in other developments in Matlock, East and Tansley. And in this area, with the rainfall and admittedly less slope on this site, I still think that material is not appropriate, and suggest that we condition that a more robust material is used for any footpath. Yeah.
No, I think that's a fair point. As I say, I don't think that detail is set out, and in any respect, there is a condition requiring those details to be agreed.
Right.
But I take your point.
Okay.
It is important that any surface is durable, and not just for people walking over it, but in terms of the weather and the climate. So, yes, I think whatever the surface ought to be, I would have thought a natural material which is appropriate for the area, but it ought to be bound and constructed in a way that's substantial and is not going to get washed away or eroded. That's a detail which would have to be agreed later, but I take the point.
Okay, thank you. And then another question about the conditions, and that is the condition 21 about the management of the landscaped areas. And this is happening in every single application that we come across now, that there are large open spaces and play areas and all sorts of things that need to be maintained. They're not going to ultimately, we hope that eventually the legal framework will be provided by government to allow these to be taken over by the county council, but at the moment they're not being taken over, and that means they're going to be subject to management by the residents. And I believe this is a risk for any resident that comes onto any of these new developments, so not only this. And do we have any standard conditions that we would expect the developer to adhere to or any terms of reference, any articles of association for the company that manages these open spaces, so that the residents have a control over the companies rather than some independent person who may be tied to the developer and not to the residents.
Chris might be able to add a bit more of this than me, because I don't have a specific answer to your question. I mean, I live on an estate which has this sort of management plan, and my experience is that a company does manage the landscaping, and you get the accounts of what the money has been spent on. You have to make a contribution every month. But in terms of how exactly that is managed, whether we have a standard, or whether Chris could add to that, what we would expect.
Yes, just to provide some clarity there. Schedule 3 of the Water Management Act would deal with potentially a method of offering up sustainable urban drainage features to an appropriate body, whatever that may be, but we're waiting for legislation in that respect. This particular condition deals with management of landscaped areas, so public open space serving this development and the play area, everything basically except privately owned gardens. And as an authority, we do not take on maintenance of new areas of open space. It's obviously a liability to the council, but that's a corporate decision rather than a planning decision. And it's standard practice, not only in Derbyshire Dales, but nationally, to require details of legal and funding mechanism for maintenance of such spaces on new development sites. The way in which it would normally work is that in discharging the condition, the applicant would put a model to us, which normally involves a management company being set up, future residents being set up as or becoming shareholders of that company and having a stake in it, and they would pay a service charge basically. Might be monthly, it might be yearly, which will basically secure the funds required in order to be able to manage that open space, ensure that the play equipment is maintained to an appropriate standard, etc. But that responsibility and that additional cost falls on the future homeowners. But that's just the way in which these things are delivered at this moment in time.
Chair, is it possible that we can condition or advise or in some way support residents having a board position on these companies, so that the residents have a voting role, have significant voting opportunities, and not just voting at an annual meeting, perhaps?
Yeah. In terms of serving a planning purpose, the objective must be maintenance of the public open space in visual amenity terms, and the method in which that's delivered sits outside of the scope of any planning decision that we make. But as an authority, when we look at these things, we do encourage that residents management companies are set up and that residents do have a stake in that company, because then they've got a vested interest or an interest in maintaining it in a manner which they would like to see it maintained.
That's all for now. Thank you.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, Jackson Lees was built on an industrial brownfield site, and when it was built, there was a conservation area purposely put there so there couldn't be a spread, and it's right up to the settlement boundary. So you've blown right through that by granting that, going into conservation area, going right over the settlement boundary. Only thing what can build over settlement boundary is affordable housing, as Chris already knows. It should be affordable housing only. So you've blown those right through. Well, you're setting a precedent now which will damage this council.
Councillor
You shouldn't
Slack,
go.
is that a question?
Yeah, it's a question.
It's the question, are we
Yeah.
setting a precedent?
Are we setting as precedent? Yes. Thank you, Chair. Are we setting now a precedent which will everybody can look at and say, well, they've done that at Middleton Bioworks, so can we do it elsewhere? I think the idea was that the top of the site at Jackson Lees would be developed. That was in the local plan. But that's down that side wasn't. It was a wildlife corridor, a conservation area, which should never, ever be developed. And you've now blown holes through it.
I think, Councillor, that's more for the debate.
It's more for
but
debate.
you have asked a question,
The
so
question is, have you blown holes through it?
You're right in that not the whole site isn't allocated for housing. If you look at the image up there, so you've got Jackson's Lee sort of to the top. The part of the site that's to the new housing, which is to the right or just below Jackson's Lee, is within the allocated site, and then the housing to the left of the picture there is not in the allocated site. At the moment, the council doesn't have a 5-year housing supply, so sites on the edge of settlements, in principle, policies allow. So the key issue here, though, is what is the impact of developing this site upon the conservation area and its setting and the local area. So that's really the key issue for members to consider. What is the impact of these houses here? Is it an acceptable impact? Is it a development which is acceptable in its context, or is it a development which is unacceptable and projecting out into the countryside? That's, I think, fundamentally getting to that at the heart of what should be considered today. In terms of precedent, no, I don't think there'll be a policy precedent. As members will be aware, sat around this table, there have been a number of sites that have come forward on the edge of settlements that aren't allocated, some of which have been approved and some of which have been refused, but they must all be considered on their own merits. So I don't think there would be any precedent set by this.
Yes, if it's a question.
It is a
please.
question. It is a question. Now that you've going into a conservation area, would you agree that you've just mentioned that we've a shortage of housing? We all know that. But now, with a shortage of housing, we now can go into conservation areas and grab hold of conservation areas. Is that a new policy?
No, that's not the policy. I mean, every application we have to consider the impact on heritage assets. Remember a couple of months ago, there was an application at Belper Road on the edge of Ashbourne which affected the setting of a listed building, and members had to consider the impact on that when they determined that application. And it's the same here. We have to consider the impact on the heritage asset, which is mainly the conservation area. There are some other heritage assets affected, and members must find where that balance lies. You know, members must consider what is the harm. Is there harm? If there is harm, is it less substantial? Is it substantial harm? And then members must weigh that against the benefits of the development, and that's what officers have done in the report.
Okay.
Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. The dark art of County Council's extrapolation of numbers for schools. I noticed that for this application, the 2 relevant schools are currently oversubscribed. Their projected numbers in 5 years' time are below capacity, but it presumably requires some knowledge of how those numbers will decline if you're not going to get to another situation where they're oversubscribed. When they do their extrapolation, do they have a breakdown year by year? Do they make an intelligent guess as to how many there'll be when the houses come forward? Or is it just a guess? I think that's a question.
It's based on demographics and population projections, and as we know, Derbyshire Dales has an ageing population, and of these Midlands authorities, it's got the highest proportion of over 50s living in the districts. And what that means in terms of modelling projected growth in pupil numbers is that the expectation is that population will continue to age, and therefore the demands on school places will reduce despite the increasing amount of development that we're seeing in Derbyshire Dales. So I have faith or confidence in the County Council's assessment in that respect.
If I may come back briefly, it's not that side of the calculation that I'm doubting. It's just for a given school, pupils are there, the numbers decline as if you like they fall off the top. But those numbers in each year group might not go quite the way that you want. The bulge might be right at the bottom, and hence oversubscription. And therefore you won't get the capacity when you need it.
Council base their projections on 5-year programmes. That would normally include all of the school years in a primary school context, and certainly secondary school level as well. So it's a 5-year projection.
The Boothroyd and Councillor Buttle.
I have two questions. I'll ask them separately. So the first one is about the fact it's allocated as land on the local plan, just to sort of 2/3 of it. Was there a understanding in the local plan of how that would be accessed from a highways perspective? Because from my understanding, is the only road in and out of that is through the unallocated area, and everything else is footpaths.
Yeah, I think the assumption is that the site will be accessed through the Jackson's Lee development, but the applicant doesn't have a right of access, so that wasn't secured. So the applicant cannot come through that way, which is why they've presented this scheme with the access from Porter Lane.
So essentially, even if we just built on that section of land that isn't in the local plan, there would still be a highway through the green bit, as it were, to the right of it.
Yeah, you'd either have to come that way, or as the applicant mentioned, it might be possible to come from Main Road, but that would, because of the levels, that would require a very significant engineering operation to get a ramp up there.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was about the housing mix. So from my understanding of the report, that the justification for the housing mix is on the basis of a design sort of parity with the Jackson Lee's development. But I assume that development was built on a slightly different housing mix requirement, and it just seems like a really worrying justification. So why, it's not like we're kind of plus or minus 5%, with 58% is four plus bedrooms. Is there a kind of a more detail you can give on that justification, I suppose, is my question, because in terms of the HCC 11, it should be 5%, and this development is 58%.
Yeah, so it's 58% for the market, but overall it's 40%, but still that's significantly over the 5% that's envisaged for 4+. It is partly on design grounds, but also the applicants provided information in terms of, as Chris mentioned, demographics and needs. What are the needs? And a large part of this development is for single-storey bungalows. They don't necessarily look like bungalows on plan because they have quite a traditional form, but on the sort of the middle of that, the middle sort of to the right of Jackson's Lee, there's a number of bungalows in that section, and the intention is essentially based upon demographics and the applicant's understanding of the market and demands of the market is how they've justified the proposed housing mix. And the relevant policy does allow for developments to not meet the requirements of HC 11 if justified on design grounds or on the grounds of need. So officers are comfortable with the justification that's been put forward.
Councillor Buttle.
Yeah, thank you. Miss Bond, I think it was, spoke to us about, no, in fact, it must be Mr. Thorne, spoke to us about the limestone build and whether or not the sample was going to be accepted with coarse stonework or whether or not it needed to be done as a random layer of more randomly laid stone. Do you actually have a policy? Are we just going to look at this? Are we going to say, yes, coursed is fine, we'll just have, like 5-inch row, then 9-inch row, then a 4-inch row, or what? Where's the plan here?
My view, bear in mind I won't be necessarily around to enforce this, so Chris will listen to me. My view is what I would call informally coursed limestone, so it shouldn't be very formally coursed. You should be able to see courses, but there should be some variation, and that's what is on the Jackson's Lee development. So I think really what we'd be looking for is something to reflect that. Rubble would probably be too informal for domestic properties like that. You tend to see that more on outbuildings and things like that. So that would be my view. Is whatever it is, it needs to it should reflect the stonework at Jackson's Lee, 'cause that looks quite well.
Yeah, I thought the word shoddy was a bit worrying. Like, if we don't want to be passing stuff that's shoddy. I have another question. When these plans come forward, they normally seem to be mainly house and not very much in the way of garden, and then a load of green space around them for water, drainage and what have you. Do we actually have a standard for how big a garden we should have for, like, I imagine a 5-bedroom house is going to have 3 children in it, at least. So are they going to be running around in a tiny little square the size of this, or what?
And there's a variety of garden sizes you can see from that that plan. There's some are smaller gardens for the smaller properties, and then some, as you can see, the large properties do have larger gardens. We don't have a set standard.
Do we not?
In terms of square meterage, no. That's something that we probably have to consider through either the local plan or supplementary planning documents.
Yeah, we would definitely. I've got that ticking along as a little bomb at the back. And the final question was working from home, and whether or not these gardens are going to be large enough for people to fit a garden office, or whether or not they're going to be large enough to grow some vegetables or do anything like that. Is there any actual common green space? I've looked at the map, looked at the plan, and there doesn't seem to be.
Well, there's no common green space upon which we'd expect buildings to be built or allotments. I think some of the gardens are large enough to have both a sort of a home office and allotments. I think some of the smaller ones possibly not, but I would say the majority of properties would have. The open space is generally set aside for biodiversity net gain purposes and play area and the attenuation pond.
I seem to remember our climate change SPD asked for spaces in smaller homes to have an area upstairs where someone could put a desk against a wall, which actually meant they could work from home rather than having it all just tiny little bedrooms. Have we actually required that in these plans?
I've not specifically required it now. I think from my memory of the layout, I haven't got them on here, that is, the bedrooms, even on the smaller properties, would have enough space for a bed and a desk.
Great.
There isn't a specific nook, I don't think.
That's good news. And just as a small request for future, when we do these things, is there any chance of actually having a link on the agenda which actually goes to the plan, so I don't have to just keep cutting and pasting on this iPad because it's terrible?
Yeah, that's probably one for Tommy and Chris to think about.
Yeah, through you, Chair, we could definitely look at implementing that.
Excellent. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I'd like to move to the debate.
Oh, right, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's lots of things wrong here. It's overdevelopment for a start. 4-bedroom and 5-bedroom houses on a small site like that, where the gardens, there's hardly any gardens still. It's all squashed in. It's overdevelopment. It's not been thought out properly. Really wants to really be deferred and a better plan brought forward, because it's squashing houses in like that in a small area and little tiny gardens. It's not the way people should be living. They should have a reasonable garden, and and the roads are that tight, as same as the gentleman spoke. Cars are going to be on pavements. It's all squashed in, and it's a very, very poor design altogether. So really, it could do with deferring and looking again at your policy on breaking into conservation areas. You're setting a precedent now, breaking into conservation areas and right up to the boundary of the settlement boundary. We never have done that previously, and suddenly now we can't do it because you need extra homes. We shouldn't in no way force people to live in tight areas like that. It's not fair to push people too close together. And breaking into a wildlife conservation area, I think it's bad, very bad. And I won't be supporting this, Chair. But I'd like defer it and we can look at it again. Probably reduce the number of properties there because it's too squashed in altogether. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Slack, is that a proposal?
I'd like to
proposing a
defer it, yeah.
deferral?
I'd like to move it for a deferral.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Whitehead, do you wish to speak?
I don't need to add anything, Chair.
So it has been moved and seconded for deferral. All those in favour? Yeah?
If it passes favour, as part of the deferral, I would request that any revised design reflects the SBD for climate change more precisely, and that would include orientating the houses so that solar panels can maximise the heat gain, that they maximise their use of south-facing roofs and internal layout and other attributes of the SPD, which this design doesn't really accommodate. I'd like the footpaths to be made out of a material that doesn't erode, and I would like to make sure that well, I suppose this is another debating point, so I'll leave that one for later. But certainly those two issues, that any revised design should support the SPD on climate change, and footpaths should be made out of a robust material.
Councillor Slack, I do need a reason for your recommendation for this to be deferred.
Yeah, the reason is that it's overdevelopment, totally overdevelopment. That's the main reason. And also council users' points of view as well on climate change.
I think Chris would like to say something.
I think from officers' perspective, if you're saying it's overdevelopment, are you saying that you don't think 57 units can be delivered on the site, in which case you may wish to consider refusal rather than deferment, or are you saying that 57 units is achievable, subject to revisions to the layout?
What I'm saying is the four big houses, a lot of them are, and it's squashed onto this site, so they want a reduction in numbers to make the site more acceptable.
Just to clarify then my position on this application is applied for in full and seeks permission for 57 dwellings. So if you're not happy with the amount of development, my advice to you would be recommendation of refusal on such grounds rather than deferment if you're not happy with the amount of
Well,
development.
we do need housing, but it needs to be properly done, not like it's been done here. It's overdeveloped, totally overdeveloped. We have houses of that size and little tiny roads and tiny gardens. It's not the way people should be living.
Yeah, just when you make a judgment on that, you just need to be mindful of the location of this site, the constraints involved. We're dealing with a conservation area. We're trying to address positively the interaction of this development with the conservation area, and also the transition from built development to countryside. You've got the grain of the existing Jackson's Lee development, which is a pretty strong queue in terms of an appropriate level of density, and then you've got development that peters out into the countryside. We feel that this is an appropriate amount of development and layout in that respect, so I think you need to be clear on your position in that regard.
Well, I'm fairly clear. Jackson Lee's is much better set out than what this site is.
So Councillor Slack and Councillor Whitehead, are you saying that you want your deferment recommendation to stand? In the meantime, I do have two other speakers, Councillor Dobbs and Councillor Boothroyd, but can we hear that you want that?
So I just asked a follow-up question to Chris then. So by deferring it, does that not give us the opportunity to go back and negotiate with the developers to either reduce or adjust the size? So it might be a smaller reduction, there might be some lower than the 57 proposed, or the layout could be changed. Could that not be done by negotiation because of a deferral rather than a refusal? Wouldn't a refusal mean they'd have to submit a whole new planning?
I'd be more comfortable with a deferment if you were satisfied that the amount of development is achievable, whether that's through different house types. I think you need to be mindful of the type of buildings that are proposed as part of this application. There's a high proportion of bungalows, and bungalows tend to be more land hungry. So you just need to be satisfied that you can achieve the amount of development that's applied for here in a different format, which achieves the objectives that you wish to achieve in this case.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Chris. But I mean, even just looking at the development, there's some double garages, aren't there? There's quite bungalows. I think there's room for negotiation with the developer to adjust some of that to create. So I think it probably could be done with about this amount of houses, but maybe with just a bit more consideration for layout. And Peter's absolutely right. Some of the road side is very tight, and we have to think about what's the environment we're creating for the people who are going to be living there for a generation to come. We don't want to be creating a ghetto, do we?
I understand your position there, Councillor Whitehead. I think it'd be useful for clarity just to explain, that in detail. So what you're saying is that you feel the density, the spread of development and the density across the entire site needs to be looked at, and you want to create great spaces between buildings, is what you're effectively saying, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Councillor Dobbs, do you want to speak on this motion for deferral?
I'm not sure how it's relevant, particularly to deferral, but I would like to speak about this development in the context of Jackson's Lee, which I think is a very successful development. And if this can in any way emulate that, we'd be missing a trick if we didn't take the opportunity. I can see that it may not be perfect, but things rarely are. I can see the point about development to the east being an entire consequence of the lack of access through the centre. Is that not automatically imposed on the scheme because you cannot access it through Jackson Lee? And therefore, if you're going to develop the site which was earmarked in the local plan, then it's kind of inevitable. And one final point, which I think should give us some sort of sense of urgency with this, in the data for school numbers, did you notice that there are precisely 12 in the catchment for Anthony Gell, 12 approved buildings. That's it. In Ashbourne, for our grammar school, which is bigger, admittedly, it's 500. So I think if we're going to build houses which are going to be served by Anthony Gell, we've got to build them. You can't keep deferring.
Councillor Boothroyd, do you want to speak on the motion to defer?
No, I think it's being clarified that essentially by a deferral we are looking to negotiate the makeup of the housing and how that essentially delivers against the housing need slightly better. So I don't think there's a query necessarily about the numbers, but it's about the size of those in relation to the amenities that are provided for those. So you're essentially providing large houses, but not much amenity space for them.
So it has been moved and seconded for a deferral for the reasons given. Are we happy with the reasons, Chris? Yeah. Can I take the vote then, please? All those in favour of a deferral? And those against? And myself. So, deferral. Was it not a time? Right. Okay, so that motion's lost. Please.
Yes, Chair. I'll move the officer recommendation because I think the developers come down from 75 to 57. It's come down from 75 to 57, which is already 18 less. It's not everybody that wants a big garden nowadays. Some people want a small garden. I think we've got a good mix of bungalows, smaller houses. The only thing I would say is that, we have these affordable houses, 2 years down the line, people put in a planning application, get an extension, then these houses all of a sudden become unaffordable yet again. So I'd probably like to see a condition that these smaller houses cannot be extended on the smaller houses, on the smaller properties. So I'd move officer recommendation with that addition, if that was possible.
Do I have a seconder for that before I go to Chris for?
In the interests of ensuring that the dwellings remain affordable, I think it's a reasonable suggestion that Councillor Lees makes, and it's within your gift to impose a condition along those lines.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. May I just say two things? The first is about footpaths again, and make sure that the footpaths, can I ask the officers to, when it comes to evaluating what material is used, that they look at making sure that it's a robust material. And the second point is about enforcement of conditions. Now, on the developer's previous site in Tansley, conditions were not enforced, and there were terrible problems resulting from that, including water running off off the site into the roads, and no wheel washing happening, and also there was no plan for the movement of trucks on the site before building started. Buildings were occupied before various things were completed and signed off, and that is just not the way to run a planning authority. We need to make sure that all of these conditions in this are enforced, and the developer does not proceed until unless it's in line with the conditions. And I think members of this committee will be trying to watch this, and I know that some of the councillors outside this committee will certainly be watching how this development is enforced. The conditions are enforced in this particular application because of the experience in other sites by the same developer in Matlock East and Tansley.
Yeah. Do you want to come back on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think
I have to say from the chair that I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Hughes that it's so important that we as a council are seen to enforce those conditions that we agree to.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully accept those sentiments. I think members just need to be mindful that as a planning authority we have to act within planning guidance that's set by government, and there's clear guidance on when we should not take enforcement action, and we follow that guidance. And as authority, we are one of few Derbyshire authorities that serves enforcement notices regularly, and where there are breaches of planning control, where it's proportionate and reasonable to take enforcement action, we do so. So I don't want it to be a reflection on the authority that we're poor or weak on planning enforcement. We're acting within guidelines that's set by government.
Chairman, I come back on that. It's not that we necessarily have to put out enforcement notices. It's that we make sure that by soft management of the developer, that we never get to the point where we have to enforce in that way, and that means active management of the developer through the process of building out the development. And I'd hope that we wouldn't ordinarily have to enforce, because enforcement is a very difficult thing to do, and it's costly, and it's costly for the developer. But and I think if we can do it by active management of the developer, that's the way I would hope that it would occur.
From the chair, can I just be absolutely certain what we're actually voting for? We've had it moved and seconded. I just want some clarification on the removal of, are we saying removal of permitted development rights for houses of 2 bedrooms? What are we saying?
I think what Councillor Lees has suggested is that all the affordable dwellings on the site, that we put a condition to remove the permitted development right to extend those properties, because it's the extensions that result in the properties attracting a higher value and then become or could potentially render them unaffordable in the future. So I think it's removal of certain permitted development rights, but only permitted development rights that relate to extensions in relation to the affordable units.
Councillor Butler, have you got
I have, yes. Speaking to, no, we're no longer deferring. The applicant was waxing lyrical the other day, one side, talking about Wonderwall and his energy efficient methods of heating the home and reducing the carbon footprint, and whether or not there was even a need for the use of gas. I assume that we're going to be conditioning an energy statement as we go along, and you're going to be checking along that all the works that are seeding are reasonably sensible when it comes to meeting climate change requirements. Is that right?
As pointed out by the applicant in their address to members this evening, they are committed towards delivering microgeneration on these dwellings, but as they've set out that requirement in both building regulation terms and as technology develops may change, and they're open to, or agreeable to, a condition that allows us to agree all the measures to help mitigate the effects of adapted to climate change. So that could include measures that haven't yet been identified. So we'll try and deliver the maximum possible to achieve the objective that we wish to achieve in terms of climate change measures. So that's something that we can deal with by condition, something will be...
If we could, that would be great. I just want to check, you don't mean by microgeneration as actually putting gas into every house and it having a little turbine? You don't mean those whole things, do you?
No, the applicant mentioned solar panels and battery storage, and I don't think you'd get gas, or there would be gas heating on this.
Thank you very much. If you could chase that one up as we go along, that'd be great.
Councillor Boothroyd.
I just had a question on the affordable home restriction. So from my understanding, most of the affordable homes are one-bedroom flats that we are essentially provisioning as part of this thing. So the possibility for extension is fairly limited anyway with a flat. My other question is about this provision of solar, essentially. That's what we're talking about when we say microgeneration on top of housing. Is there any evidence that the developer is doing that at other locations within our district? They are actually acting on that promise. And if it is put in, can we make sure it's put in for the affordable and the unaffordable homes, whatever the word is, and not just linked in to those that are market value?
Yeah, just there's a couple of points there just to pick up on. So there are flats proposed as part of this development. You're right in that the same permitted development rights wouldn't apply to flat buildings, but there are 2- and 3-bedroom dwelling houses, and I think they're the properties where we look to restrict permitted development rights to prevent extensions being constructed without our prior approval. It doesn't prevent someone from extending their property, but they'd have to submit an application to us first so we can consider the impacts of that extension on that property and its affordability. In terms of the measures that you've identified to help mitigate the effects of adapted climate change, the developer has to now adhere to more stringent building regulation requirements which have come into effect, and from 2025 those requirements become even more stringent. So there's a move now towards different methods of heating, which moves away from the conventional gas boiler to other forms of microgeneration and sustainable energy production, and that will improve going forward. But the developer and other house builders are all adjusting to this change, which is beneficial in terms of meeting climate change objectives.
Okay, I am going to move to the vote now. I think we've had a long and thorough debate, so all those in favour? Yeah. Councillor Lees, I've just been reminded, do you want the conditions about the footpaths included in the recommendation?
Yes, please. Yeah, that they are bound materials, either tarmac,
Chris is telling me
resin,
they're
block
already,
paving.
Adam's telling me they're already conditioned.
Yeah, and I'd
So
like
are we happy with that?
the development rights as put on as 2-bedroom or under. The 2-bedroom properties remain as 2 bedrooms. 2 and 3, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I will move to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. So that application is approved with those conditions. Thank you. Right, moving on to application 5.2, which is 23004474 full. Change of use and alterations to upper floors for short-term occupancy living accommodation at 9 to 11A Marketplace, Ashbourne, and Councillor Lees is leaving the room. We have one speaker, that's Mr. John Imber, who's the agent. Is Mr. Imber here? Yes, thank you. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Imber, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Your officer's report clearly sets out all relevant planning considerations and arrives at a positive recommendation, which is welcomed. Ashbourne Ex-Servicemen's Club is a long-standing institution which has served the town for over 100 years. The proposals will broaden its income streams and will ensure its long-term viability, hopefully meaning that the club can continue to fulfil its role for the next 100 years. The proposals will provide short-term residential accommodation suitable for tourists visiting the Peak Park, seasonal workers and visiting ex-servicemen. The applicants note and accept the recommendation that visits be limited to a maximum of 1 calendar year. The key consideration is the impact of the proposals upon the listed building and the conservation area. The scheme has been carefully prepared in accordance with pre-application advice given by the Council's officers to respond as sensitive as possible to heritage assets. We would agree with the officer's assessment that the proposals result in minor, less than substantial harm to the significance of the listed building. The National Planning Policy Framework requires that this harm be offset by public benefits. In this case, the proposals would contribute towards the ongoing viability of this long-established institution. They would also secure much-needed repairs to the underused upper floors of the building, which members will have noticed during the site visit are in need of some attention. As well as securing the long-term viability of the club, the scheme will ensure that the building can continue to contribute positively to the townscape. As is clearly set out in the officer's report, these benefits outweigh the very minor, less than substantial harm in this instance. The scheme would also provide the benefits of providing short-term accommodation sustainably located within the town centre, with good access to shops, services and public transport. These services and facilities will in turn benefit from increased footfall. The proposals will contribute towards addressing the Council's current housing shortage by bringing underused floor space back into beneficial use. There are no objections from the Highway Authority or the Council's Environmental Health Officers, and no objections have been raised by the general public. We would therefore encourage members to approve these proposals as recommended by their professional officers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Spot on. Can I ask who's taking this one, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Members visited this site yesterday and will have noted that this development involves 2 conjoined Grade 2 listed buildings within the centre of Ashbourne within its conservation area. This full application concerns the alterations to the shop frontage, which have been set out to you on the site visit, some external alterations to the building in the form of blocking up of a window and door opening on the side elevation, and also the change of use of the first, second and third floors to 10 number bed sits. You'll note from the officer's report that the size of those bed sits is far below nationally prescribed space standards, hence why we don't feel they're acceptable as dwelling units, but they are acceptable as short-term living units for holidaymakers and seasonal workers. The use of those buildings will secure the future of the building and the value that it has to the community as a community facility. And in that sense, although we recognise there's some harm, albeit at a less than substantial level of harm in national planning policy framework terms, that harm would be outweighed by the public benefits as set out by the speaker this evening. Happy to take questions on this one.
No, if there are no questions, we'll move on to the debate. Councillor Murphy.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation. The speaker said, well, what I was going to say, basically. Ashbourne has this this focal point. Case in point was Sunday. Hundreds of people were actually in attendance at this venue. It gets well used throughout the year. I do understand that in recent years it's struggled to make its way. People probably don't go out and visit these sites as often as they used to because they're dealing with the effects of inflation and their disposable income. Having this accommodation will be another opportunity for the ex-servicemen's club to create revenue streams. Ashbourne in itself doesn't really have a lot of accommodation in the centre of the town, so this would be very useful, and I think it would also complement the development that we've got going on with the levelling up in this area. It obviously the building needs some TLC. I mean, some of it was in a shocking state from our visit yesterday. So I'm very happy to move this, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slack.
I'll second that as well, Chair. This building is suited to altering for holiday accommodation. I'm very sceptical of holiday cottages, you know, because it's a big expansion of it and it denies local people to get a home. But this is not doing that. This is accommodating holidaymakers who want to come here and spend a weekend or a week or so in Ashbourne, and I think it's a good. It puts a channel there for people to use that facility rather than going to holiday cottages, which is destroying the fabric of villages. So, yeah, I'm supportive of this, and it gives a revenue stream for the British Legion, the club, I thought, yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to offer to second it, but Councillor Slack got in before me. But I agree with everything that he said, and also Councillor Murphy. And I think this was. I'd just like to say, I mean, it's one of our councillors who's bringing this to the committee. So I'd just like to say that, and there was some criticism of the development by the conservation officer. I'd say that the visit to the site was absolutely essential to see why it was only minor harm to the in terms of conservation, because the quality of the bits that will be removed or partitioned off was very poor. And there was a lot of work needed to bring the building into habitable form again, particularly on the two floors that are going to be worked on. So I fully support this. I think, as Councillor Slack said, it will really help the economy of Ashbourne, and particularly, and it will fit into the Ashbourne Reborn programme in a very nice way. Thank you.
Thank you. So it has been moved by Councillor Murphy, seconded by Councillor Slack for approval. I'm going to put that to the vote. Those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Thank you. You'll have to wait a bit longer. So moving on to application 5.3, which is 23/00448 LBALT, internal and external alterations to create short-term occupancy living accommodation, new entrance and new cellar access to basement at 9 to 11A Marketplace. I think that should say Ashbourne. Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This application is for the associated works to the listed building. What members are looking at in respect to this application is the internal alterations, which are eloquently set out in section 5.2 of the officer's report. You'll note that there's changes to the historic plan form and also a historic fabric, which requires listed building consent. We acknowledge that there's a finding of harm, albeit less than substantial harm in this particular case, but we consider the public benefits to be derived to outweigh that harm, hence why we're recommending approval. Happy to take questions on this one.
Any questions? No? To debate then? Any speakers? Councillor Dobbs.
I'm happy to move officer recommendations.
Murphy?
Yes, Chair.
We can get him in now. Can somebody get him in? So moving on to application 5.4, which is 23/00765, a full application for the rebuilding and extension of an outbuilding retrospective at 18 Little Bowl Hill. Members visited this site yesterday to look at the impact of the proposal. So, are you taking that one, Chris? Oh, sorry. I do apologise. We have a speaker, Miss Cathy Cook, who's the applicant. You have 5 minutes. Apologies.
I've lived with my family since 1985 at the small holding, which is 18 Little Bowl Hill. We garden organically and for nature, and we keep rare breeds of livestock. The outbuilding is in the middle of our holding, close to the house. It was derelict, mostly a pile of rubble with a fallen-in roof. It was unusable and hazardous, with nettles and brambles and rats. Its origins were only apparent from historic maps. All that remained intact were part of the north gable and the northern part of the west wall. I'd like to apologise for the error that we made in not applying before we did this work. We weren't aware that it needed planning permission. It wasn't a new build, there was an agricultural need, and we thought that it would cause no harm to the surrounding area. We used materials with low carbon footprints, both reclaimed stone and locally grown timber. We kept the eave height at the same as the original. The lightweight roof material is the same as several others nearby, including the lean-to of the garage, which was approved as being suitable to this setting previously. The roof's simple, uninterrupted form is similar to other structures nearby. The site's enclosed and it's well screened by trees. The covered yard isn't overlooked, and nor does it overlook other properties or buildings. It's no further forward than the front of the house. It's in scale in the setting, low compared with the raised garden, and in comparison with the house and the nearby trees. If the character of the conservation has been harmed at all, we're sorry, but we feel that the impact of this is very low. There have been 4 letters of support submitted by neighbours and no objections. The outbuilding was at risk of being completely lost. We wanted to protect what little remained and give it a new life that fulfilled a real purpose. Everything that remained of the original building has been restored and protected, including stonework detailing the doorway and windows. These are still clearly visible from both inside and outside. The heritage asset has been preserved from dereliction, so there's a public benefit in that. We're members of the Rare Breed Survival Trust, with flocks of rare goats, sheep and turkeys, which we keep to conserve genetic diversity. This is important for resilience to climate change, as these rare breeds have characteristics that might well become desirable again. So conserving the population of these breeds is a public benefit. We had struggled for some time with lack of storage and covered space. The building will allow us to continue to manage our land using traditional organic methods, and so preserve the local landscape. There's a public benefit here as well. Our sheep are used for seasonal wildlife conservation grazing, both in our fields and in our neighbours' rewilding project. The diversity of wildflowers, including orchids, has increased. Insects and small mammals have become plentiful, and there are regular sightings of bats and birds of prey. The outbuilding allows us to continue keeping the animals that support this conservation programme, and this is a public benefit. Birds raised 2 broods of chicks in the outbuilding in the summer of 2023, building their nest under the roof. We're lifelong members of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and we've taken their advice about how to encourage birds that like open-sided barns, as these are increasingly rare. Taking DWT's advice, we've installed a barn owl box, swallows' nests, and a sparrow dormitory in the building. We provided the public benefit of habitat opportunities for declining species. The Bat Conservation Trust has also surveyed the site. 3 species of bats are present, noctule, pipistrelle, and one of the myotis species, either whiskered or brand. Following their advice, we've put up bat boxes on the building to provide roosts for these protected species. If we're told that we must take down the restored building and the covered yard, we would have to destroy these habitats for declining and protected species and remove the public benefits of wildlife conservation. We hope that the committee will take the view that any harm to the conservation area is minimal and is outweighed by the public benefits of retaining the building and the covered yard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sticking to your time. That's much appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members visited this site yesterday and had a good look at the building. As been pointed out, the site is in the designated conservation area. And as the applicant mentioned, on the left there you've got the submitted drawing of how the building was before the development took place. It's not sure exactly what the origins of this building is, but my view and the view of the conservation officer is that the building was likely a pigsty or some sort of similar building, a traditional agricultural building with a lean-to roof. As you can see from the plans, the extensions incorporate a curved roof, timber and a lean-to, and there are concerns about the characteristics of those extensions and how well or not they relate to the original building and the impact on the conservation area therefore. And that is the key issue really. What is the impact on the conservation area in this building? And if there is some harm, are there any public benefits which outweigh that harm? Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Do we have any questions? Move to the debate then. Councillor Franks.
In terms of this little building, it probably was something as small as a pigsty. And following the visit yesterday, I was so impressed with the level and the extent the family have gone to preserve what little remained of that building, preserve the heritage. And quite honestly, in looking at it, it so blends into the landscape, I can't see actually what harm it is doing. Okay, the roof isn't totally lean-to all the way through, but once weathered, we could hardly see the roof from the roadside and the other side of the valley. It wasn't overlooked in any respect. I think the harm is minimal. I'm a great supporter of agriculture and preserving our farming heritage. although this is just a small holding, on a small level, as equally as I would be on a large level. In all truth, I can't see any negative impact with this small building. And I totally support this project and the conservation and the whole idea behind it.
Can I ask then, Councillor Franks, are you recommending approval against the officer's recommendation
I
of
would
refusal?
recommend approval of this application.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's adorable. So, which I know is not a planning consideration, but just, but no, very happy to second the proposal.
Do you wish to speak then, Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you. I agree with Marilyn that they've done a lot of work in preserving the form, so you can actually read the building. And I thought that was a purpose of conservation, was being able to read what went before, and you certainly can in this case. And as such, it looks like a slightly different approach has been taken to the conservation of the building, perhaps, and there may be lots of different strategies for conservation, but I think they have chosen one particular version. And the parts of the building that protrude would probably not have been required a planning application in the end, I'm sure. So I can't see that I think this is providing significant public benefit through the bat boxes and nesting sites. So I'm thoroughly approve of it.
Thank you. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. It's amazing, isn't it, really? The first application, houses are put up on a conservation area, open, everybody could see it. Now this little area, you can't see it. Nobody can see it from the road. It's blended in beautifully into the hillside and all the wildlife and everything. It's good. That's a good part. But it's amazing, isn't it? We got all them houses going on a conservation area, and now we quibbling over a little tiny bit of conservation, which will be improved immensely by all the wildlife and everything in that area. So I agree with Councillor Franks' proposal.
Councillor Boothroyd, did you wish to speak?
Yeah. I think it's just to say, I think it's clear that the public benefit of having this building outweighs the minimal impact. Simple as that.
I do have to say from the chair that although we do slightly frown on retrospective applications, but I genuinely do believe in this case that the applicant was not aware that planning permission was needed.
You almost stole my thunder. When I consider some of the retrospective planning applications we have to look at, and this is quite inoffensive, really, and it's an easy decision to make. Thank you.
So it has been moved by Councillor Frank, seconded by Councillor Whitehead for approval of this application. Can I see all those in favour, please? That's unanimous. Thank you. Can we move on then to application 5.5, which is 23/00768 full. We do have some late reps on this, so there is quite a lot to read. So I'll give you some time to read that. I don't think we're upset at all about that last one, were you? Shall we? After these two, depends how far they go. No, I think this could take a long time. What shall we do? We could do one, yeah. See how it goes with one. Do you think we're all right to carry on? In terms of what? Life? Oh, man. Any member need any more time to read? It looks like you're still reading, yeah.
Yes, Chair, but can I, before Chris talks about, or Adam talks about this, can I just ask that he covers the complicated relationship between the outline planning permission, the previous full planning application 0037, and the current application, because I note that the comments in the response here are related to different applications, and it's a bit difficult to follow. But as I understand it, the current application before the committee tonight doesn't have any frontage onto Thatcher's Lane. They're all onto Thatcher's Croft. So I feel that there's a need to explain the circumstances around that for clarity.
Yeah, so this is for, as I think I said, erection of 4 dwelling houses at land off Thatcher's Croft, Thatcher's Lane in Tansley. Chris, you're doing this one, aren't you? Oh, sorry, I've forgotten the speakers again. I'm so sorry. Ms. Vicky Rains, a local resident, to comment on the application. You have 3 minutes.
First of all, it doesn't say it's a retrospective application, so I think you ought to get that correct. How many more retrospective applications, building without permission and properties occupied but not signed off, are you all going to allow on this site? Where are the validation reports ensuring drainage is per condition, reports that need to be produced prior to occupation? The proposed social homes are small and cramped with minimal garden space. The change in orientation, the dense parking, which is planned to run the whole length of the homes, and which is contrary to DDC's own housing advice, who wanted a better design solution, is not acceptable. Vehicles will have to reverse in or out of a parking lot, which is a hazard for residents living in the adjacent social homes, bearing in mind children play in the street because of the lack of amenity space and non-existent gardens. There is no mention of the required 1 metre fence badger corridor, which runs adjacent to the proposed development and is identified in the original plans. No mention in the report of priority species. There is a set in adjacent land to this site. The original plans show block paved driveways and hard standing to help with permeability. There is no mention in the current plans of how the parking area will be surfaced, where are the solar panels, storage for residents, outdoor equipment. No mention of maintenance regime for the access road, drains or suds. No indication of street lighting in this densely built area. It was advised by Derbyshire Dales landscape officer that all hedgerows should be retained and received appropriate protection. As the officers know, all trees, hedges and vegetation have been destroyed by the developer. This is yet another development in Tansley where retrospective development has been allowed by DDC, thus failing to ensure the democratic decision-making takes place as advised by MPPF and the Localism Act. Please accept these comments as a strong objection to the application. I also feel that it would have been nice, with all these late reps to come in, how long have you had to look at this?
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Ian Strange, a local resident, to comment on the application. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Strange.
Thank you, Chair. Ian Strange, Tansley Parish Council. These comments that I'm giving tonight apply to both the planning applications, this one and the next one on Thatcher's Croft. The concern we would like the Planning Committee to consider is the ownership of Thatcher's Lane. At the present time, this is 2/3 owned by Derbyshire County Council and 1/3 by the developer. This came about when Derbyshire Dales put a condition on Thatcher's Croft development that Thatcher's Lane had to be widened. This the developer did without a legal agreement or a bond being paid and put in place. The Parish Council, I've been to Derbyshire County Council and seen all the letters sent to the developer regards this. He chose to ignore them and not reply to any. He just carried on illegally and widened the road without paying a bond. We inquired from Derbyshire County Council why they did nothing about this. They informed us that it was a condition of Derbyshire Dales that was put on by them to enforce it to be made sure that it was done correctly and adopted in conjunction with Derbyshire County Council. We now have part of a public road and pavement, privately owned, where school children have to wait on a private footpath to get on the school bus. The question is, when this needs repairing, snow clearing, salting, who decides what to be done? And whether we as council taxpayers, all of the people in this room possibly, expected to foot the bill. Mr. Griffiths knew about this as it was brought to his attention on a previous site visit, and he chose to do nothing about it. And also there was a number of letters from the Parish Council regards this. I asked the Planning Committee to defer this decision on this application and the other one until a legal agreement and a bond has been paid and entered into as to put this matter right and the other matters arising on this side. This may possibly be the last opportunity for this to happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Strange. Chris, you're doing this one, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to set out the development that's applied for in respect of this application and also the relevance of the earlier extant permission that's in place. Just going back on Councillor Hughes's request. This application concerns 4 number dwelling houses as set out in the application documents that members will have been able to have regard to ahead of the meeting, and will have also been able to assess it in respect of the site visit that was undertaken yesterday. Planning permission has already been granted by the authority under full application 20/00037. Now, that application was a hybrid application which gave outline permission for certain development on the site and full permission for other parts of the development, some of which is being built out or is currently in the process of being built out. The outline part of the application sought approval of all matters with the exception of appearance. Now, the applicant could have either submitted a approval reserve matters application which dealt with appearance, or they've chosen in this particular case to submit a full application because they've made changes to the layout, which was a matter that had been approved in respect of the earlier hybrid application. This application therefore considers the 4 dwellings afresh, but the previous permission is a material consideration in that it has already granted the development in terms of its layout, landscaping, access, and also the scale of development. Members, having visited the site yesterday, will have been able to consider the development because it is partly built. In terms of the relationship of the dwelling houses with the other approved dwellings on that site. The changes principally involve the alignment of the 4 dwellings. There were previously 2 pairs of semis that were staggered, and now the dwellings align with one another with frontage parking as opposed to parking down the side of one of the units. But in general character and appearance terms, officers are satisfied that the visual impact of the development is acceptable. It doesn't result in any adverse impacts on the character and appearance of the area or the site's wider surroundings or environment, such that we could reasonably recommend that this application is refused. Hence why we're, as officers, recommending approval of this application, having regard to the extant permission that's in place, the matters that have already been agreed, and this development on its merits. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chris. Oh, gosh. Right. Who was first? Councillor Franks.
Sorry. It's a question about clarity, Chris, about the parking in front of the 4 houses. My understanding from the site visit yesterday was that the first property was to have a garden in front and there was space for parking at the side of that property, so it wasn't actually parking in front of each property.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to describe this to you because we've not got the plan on the presentation. But the original scheme proposed 2 pairs of semis. The first pair of semis had parking down the side and a very small informal area for planting. And then the pair that's closest to the western boundary of the site, that had frontage car parking. So the proposals that's before members this evening are for the same two pairs of dwellings, but with frontage parking to both pairs, as set out on the plan that you should have seen yesterday when visiting the site.
Right. From what I saw at the site, there was parking. The very first of the first pair had parking to the side, and I think we were told there'd be some garden there.
Are you referring to the previously approved scheme or the
current
situation?
Scheme? There's no space between the 2 blocks of 2, or at the far end, but there was side space for the first house, wasn't there?
Yes, the plan shows parking to the frontage of what's referred to as number 21 on the plan, and there's an informal area of open space to the front of number 22 with parking down the side of that property. Right. So there is still an area of landscaping to the front of what is number 22 with parking down the side, but the parking down the side of what is number 21 has been removed, and we've got frontage parking. So we've got continuation of that frontage parking. So what was 4 car parking spaces is now effectively 6 across 3 of the properties,
Right.
with only parking down the
Okay,
side
that's-
of 1 unit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions on this design related to the other one, and then one on the conditions that the speakers have suggested we should consider. In terms of the materials used for the driveways, is it correct that that's now block paving rather than that allows water to escape between the blocks? Or is it, because I understand that the revised drainage system has been designed to take less runoff, and the amount of runoff is determined by the use of block paving.
Yes, in the comments made by the previous speakers, reference was made to drainage, land drainage,
Yes.
across the site, and members may recall that we imposed a condition which required independent verification of the approved drainage system on the previous application, which allowed 4 dwellings in this location. Now, we have a letter from the applicant's drainage consultant that has inspected the drainage for the dwellings that have been occupied. There is a flaw in the condition in that it required full verification of the drainage system prior to occupation of a dwelling, and clearly occupation of a dwelling will occur prior to completion of the development as a whole. So it is a flaw in the drafting of the condition, but we are satisfied that a drainage consultant has been out inspecting the drainage for each individual plot and verifying that it is acceptable before those plots are occupied, and that's a proportionate and reasonable approach in respect of drainage on this site.
Okay, thank you. That wasn't quite the question I was asking, but thank you for that, because that was another possible question that could be asked. I think the point was that there has been a change in material between the previous application and the current one, and the change in material is now block paving rather than, I don't know what was proposed before, and that means there's less runoff, and therefore there was less capacity required. And I'm assuming that is now carried forward, and that the design it will provide block paving in front of houses where the cars are.
Yes, that's recognised by the drainage consultant,
Yeah.
because they've basically said that this application introduces permeable block paving
Right,
for the majority of the plots, and this significantly reduces the area to be discharged into the drainage network and ultimately into the SUDs. But it has been designed, to accommodate more water, if you like, from impermeable surfaces.
Now, thank you for that. In terms of the road layout, can we take the 2 applications together? Has there been any change in the road layout, which means that it is more difficult to now turn around a refuse vehicle or manoeuvre a fire engine?
Yes, so the application that's before members is the exact same in terms of the road layout, and members have previously approved development of this site on the basis of advice that was given to them by officers. You'll note from the late representations received that the parish council representative has pointed to the Highway Authority raising objections to the original application on numerous grounds, one of which being adequate manoeuvring space within the site, and also means of access onto Thatcher's Lane. This application doesn't involve any access onto Thatcher's Lane, and the officer's view at the time was that the Highway Authority had not objected to 5 dwellings being served off Thatcher's Lane in this location, and therefore the objection reason on that ground wasn't considered to be sustainable, and the applicant had written correspondence from the Highway Authority to that effect. The issue of manoeuvring within the site was addressed, and that was set out in the officer's report. That amended swept path analysis was submitted to us, which showed a large refuse vehicle could adequately turn within the site. There's been reference, and we've debated this at length in the office, this matter having been raised on numerous occasions by one of the speakers this evening, about the accessibility of the site by a fire vehicle. Now, we're satisfied, having raised this with the Fire Authority, having discussed the building regulations requirement, that this development is acceptable in that respect. there is manoeuvring space within the site for a fire vehicle to reverse the distance required, and for the distance then for a fire engine to be able to service buildings that may be on fire. That does meet building regulation requirements and is something that we've considered.
For both of the applications?
Well, we're not dealing with access. Access has already been approved.
Right.
Although you've got the access to the general road network that forms part of our consideration in this application, but we have to have regard to the extant permission, which approved essentially the same road layout.
Yeah, no, I assume that was, yes. So in neither case has the road layout changed. So we have already given approval for the road layout as it stands.
The only change is parking. The parking has changed. So you could argue, well, vehicle manoeuvres are slightly different, but the general road alignment and makeup is the same.
Right. Thank you for that. And my third question is about the suggestion of I think it would be a Grampian condition. Is it Grampian? About tying this development to the Thatcher's Lane widening that has been done and has resulted in part of the Thatcher's Lane being private and the other part being public.
Yes, I'm a little bit confused in terms of what was presented to us. My understanding of the situation is that Thatcher's Croft is part of it is potentially built to adoptable standards, but it's up to the developer in terms of whether they wish the Highway Authority to adopt the highway network, or whether they're happy for the highway to be maintained through a management company with any other open space on the site. In highway safety terms, the road layout is acceptable. So the method of adoption and future management is, provided that's controlled and it's one or the other, that's acceptable in planning terms.
Okay, I think the Thatcher's Lane part where it's been widened is off the site, though. I mean, it's part of the public road network.
Yeah, that was my understanding of the comments that were made by the second speaker. That sits outside of our control in that we're dealing with the adopted highway and works the adopted highway. The application is the application site and the site owned by the applicant. We can't enforce or require the applicant to do something that's on land that's not within his control.
So that would be Grampian.
It just wouldn't be an enforceable. Yeah, it wouldn't be an enforceable condition. It'd be beyond our powers. So it'd be ultra vires.
The slack.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, this road situation. Who owns the road, who maintains the roads, it's got to be sorted out one way or the other. The people that live alongside the road, the same as everybody else, they pay the council tax, and so much of that council tax goes to Derbyshire County Council highways for maintenance of roads. And they are paying that council tax, so therefore they should be maintained by the Derbyshire County Council highways, really. But why do you stand on that one?
I accept your view on that, Councillor Slack. You're entitled to have that view. From a planning perspective, provided the road network is safe in highway safety terms, and provided there is a method for future management, whether that's through the adoption process, through Section 738 of the Highway Act, or whether it's through a management company, either method is acceptable in planning terms.
But why should they have to pay a management company when Derbyshire County Council should do that work?
It's a choice you make when you buy a property. It depends on the model that's adopted by the developer, and you buy a property in full knowledge that the roads aren't adopted and there's a service charge to be levied. It's a choice, isn't it, you make?
It's not a good way, is it, really?
Councillor Buttle.
Thank you very much. I was on the committee when we visited last time, not this time, and so there was a culvert running down the far side of the track, pretty much where this house, which has been shuffled to one side, ran pretty much through the edge of that. Do we know what happened with that culvert? Is it still in there? Is it part of our drainage scheme? I remember there was a culvert and there was a badger path, and we were going to leave a 2-metre gap for the two to wander off down the hill. But I'm wondering if those have somehow got lost?
I can't tell you if what's happened to the culvert, if there was an existing culvert there. All I can say is that the approved layout showed the houses on that boundary to be a similar distance set back from the highway, with parking spaces in front. The gap between the boundary and the property is now much greater than what was shown on the original plan.
Yeah, thank you. That was what I was wondering. I was wondering if there was some sort of connection between the culvert and the shuffling sideways and whether or not we were aware of that. And there was also the question of the badger path. I know badgers are creatures of habits and they do tend to stick to their previous method. Is that still available to them, or are we shoveling them onto the road where they're more liable to be hurt?
Yes, this is something that has been considered by officers, and having looked at the report and the recommended conditions, the plan that was approved was for a badger corridor, if you like, to be formed along the footpath that runs through the central part of the site, because the width of that footpath and the space either side is much greater than the space available between basically what would be enclosures to private properties. Now, the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust were happy with that arrangement, but they also suggested that a route through the gardens, through gaps in boundary treatments, be provided to provide a second route potentially through the development site. I think it would be prudent to secure that through condition, potentially an additional condition, to ensure that potential route through is preserved and delivered through this particular plot on that boundary through to the rest of the development.
Excellent. Yes, that's where I was going. There's like a 300 millimetre square hole, not a 300 metre square hole, 300 millimetre square hole for a badger to pop through should do the job. Thank you very much.
Councillor Whiter, did you have a question?
I did. Just a couple of questions. I just wonder whether we can just pick up on some of the points made by some of the speakers, Chris. So just three points, which I'd just like a little bit of kind of further clarity on, if that's possible. So the speakers mentioned something around about a history of retrospective planning applications. I don't know if it's particularly on this site or particularly in Tansley. I'd just be interested to know a little bit more about that. I'll give you all my questions and you can answer all of them. The second question was around the safety of the site and the proposed development, because I think mention of children playing, it's opposite social housing. Have we taken consideration in terms of kind of safety of the community? And the last point was, I think some points were raised about previous issues with this particular developer, and I just wonder whether you have anything to add around the relationship we have with this developer, and have they got a history of fulfilling their promises or breaking their promises?
I'll answer those as best I can without compromising myself and the council. In terms of retrospective planning permissions, we have to accept that this and the Whiteley Lane development, the changes were made. So thinking in terms of giving Tansley as an example, there was a housing development off Whiteley Lane, and we had a historic permission that was secured by a different developer to ultimately the developer that carried out that development. And they wanted to change some of the house types because they had their own products and their own houses they wanted to build. Now, they basically commenced development ahead of receiving planning permission from us, albeit that they submitted an application to us. And this always presents us with a dilemma as an authority, because we have to act in a proportionate way. And the government is very clear that planning enforcement, formal enforcement action should only be taken where there's a harm to the environment and it's expedient to do so, and they specifically set out circumstances where you shouldn't usually take enforcement action, and one of those being if the sole purpose of taking action was to regularise development that would otherwise be supported through the submission of an application to us. So always having to make that judgment when we look at developments and works that have taken place. In that particular instance, you'll note that we presented an item to committee, or the application to committee, with a recommendation of approval. So in that respect, you'd say, well, it wouldn't be reasonable and appropriate to take formal enforcement action in that respect. Mention is often made to stop notices. Now, stop notices can't be served without an associated enforcement notice. And ultimately, if that enforcement notice is quashed by an inspector or is withdrawn, it leaves the council vulnerable to a claim of compensation, because you are effectively stopping development from taking place. There's people that have got commercial interests in that development, contracted to carry out development, and you're stopping them from carrying out those works. So you have to be very, very careful when you serve such notices. And there's clear guidance and rules that we have to work within in order to protect the public purse and act in the wider interests of Derbyshire Dales residents. I'm sure if we serve stop notices willy-nilly, it might appease local residents, but if there was an influx or significant award of costs against the council, then I'd suggest that is poor administration on part of this service. Addressing the issue of safety, these dwellings are served by rear gardens. The original proposal, 2 of the units had frontage car parking. The other units had a very small area of open, private open space on the front of the developments. I have children. If I had young children, I'd ensure that they played in safety in the rear gardens, and there is that appropriate needed space in order for them to be able to safely play within development. So I've got no concerns in that respect. In terms of the developer, my view of the developer is that they deliver very high quality homes. You'll have noted from yesterday that the homes and the quality of the development is very high. They've appointed a renowned architect to deliver the development on this site. I'd say was very, very high quality. They do sometimes make changes without seeking or getting the permission first of all. But I suppose as a developer, they're making calculated risks, aren't they? They're considering the merits, if you like, of the developments that they're carrying out, and second guessing what our view might be on the appropriateness of taking enforcement action. But that's a risk that the developer takes.
Are there any more questions, please? Sorry.
Thank you. All I was going to ask was, yesterday on the site, it was mentioned that something had been signed off erroneously, and I was just wondering if that was a material factor at all.
Yes, this was in reference to the verification of the drainage system, but that's something that's been subsequently remedied, and the applicant has engaged their consultant to provide us with verification information at the relevant stages of construction.
That's super, thank you.
Could I ask a question, please? I think there are questions to be asked about the adoption of roads on the housing estates, because it's not just about the road surface. It's also about the provision of street lights. And I realise that we are where we are, but just wanted to bring that up. But the other thing I wanted to just ask as a question is, have we taken advice from the fire chief about what are mandatory requirements for access for fire engines, basically? As far as I understand it from the chief fire officer, 20 metres is the mandatory requirement under the building regs, but it can be applied with some flexibility, but 20 metres is the starting point. Now, can you just explain what this distance is? Because this is clearly a dead end. Where would a fire engine turn round, or would they have to reverse?
Yeah, I've actually brought along the relevant section of the building regulations with me, and the actual requirement is for turning facilities to be provided within the site so that a fire vehicle doesn't have to reverse more than 20 metres to access a property. But then there's a separate requirement that for dwelling houses, access for a pumping appliance should be provided within 45 metres of all points from inside the dwelling house. So it's that 20 metres reversing distance, and then there's a 45 metres into all parts of a dwelling house that might be on fire. So having looked at the layout, having discussed it with the fire chief and had regard to the building regulation requirements, this meets those requirements. And if it didn't meet building regulation requirements, it won't be signed off from a building regulations perspective.
Are there any more questions? So we'll move to the debate. No one wishes to speak?
Okay, well,
Make
I'll
a
speak.
proposal.
Yeah, I'll propose that we adopt this. That we adopt officers' recommendations with the Badger conditions.
Right, Ed.
And I'm happy to second that with the budget conditions.
Do we have any other speakers? Thank you. Just wondering if we carry on with it, shall we? Shall we carry on to the next one, do you think? Did it? What do you think? We're happy to carry on if anybody's vehemently against us carrying on with the next application, and then have a break, because it will be 8:30 and we'll need a resolution to carry on anyway. So the next application is 5.6 23/00912. Erection of 2 single-storey dwelling houses at land of Thatcher's Croft, Thatcher's Lane. I can never understand why we don't call them bungalows, but there we are. We do have some late reps, so I'm going to give you time to read them. Please put your hand up when you've read them. Well done. So we have two speakers, Ms Vicky Rains, local resident. 3 minutes, Vicky.
Hi. This application is part of the piecemeal development officers are enabling at Thatcher's Croft. It appears they prefer not to take the holistic route as advised by MPPF. They appear to be avoiding enforcing the conditions as set out in the hybrid application. Information relevant to the application is not forthcoming, and advice given by such consultees, e.g. Derbyshire Dales Highways, refused the application for development, and DDDC Landscape Officer advised retaining all hedges at Thatcher's Lane. The two proposed dwellings have a larger footprint than the original plan. The properties appear too large for the plots, with small gardens and driveways with no turning facility, meaning that the cul-de-sac will be used to manoeuvre to ensure leaving in a forward gear. It should be noted that there are 4 dwellings accessing the cul-de-sac and there is no visitor parking. There is only one pedestrian footway within the cul-de-sac, and rubbish bins will need to be wheeled into a bin store as the refuse truck is too large to access the top of the cul-de-sac. The officer's report states that these dwellings will be suitable for old people and with a disability who will not want a large garden. The lack of pavements and the fact that residents will have to wheel their bins down the road and back maybe precludes this demographic, he mentions. A swept path diagram to inform us of the turning capabilities is still not forthcoming from planning. This information would confirm if B5 can be achieved. I know we've gone over this, but access routes longer than 20 metres require turning facilities. One questions if emergency services will be able to access the cul-de-sac, if a refuse truck is unable to do so. There is no mention of the Badger corridor. No maintenance plan is available related to highways or its tenure. Surprisingly, no eco-amenities are apparent, no solar panels, charging points, water butts, which negates DDC's supposed eco-credentials. The hybrid plan showing the proposals for the whole site and passed by the Planning Committee needs to be adhered to. To deviate, as it is happening, makes a mockery of the planning system. The reality is this development is significantly different from the one approved. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Ian Strange, local resident, to comment on the application. 3 minutes.
I would just like to reiterate my earlier comments because I think Mr. Whitmore didn't understand what I was getting at. And this is regards the ownership of Thatcher's Lane, which is the road, the public highway that feeds this site. This is owned 2/3 by Derbyshire County Council and 1/3 by the developer. This is a public highway I'm talking about, and the children have to stand on a footpath which is owned by the developer. And there's about 25 children stand on there every day. This came about when Derbyshire Dales put a condition on Thatcher's Croft development that Thatcher's Lane had to be widened. The developer did this without a legal agreement or paying for a bond to be put in to widen this road. This was a condition put on by Derbyshire Dales, not the County Council. The Parish Council have seen all the letters from the Derbyshire County Council to the developer, and he ignored every one of them, and he didn't pay for the bond to widen this road. We inquired from Derbyshire County Council why they didn't do anything about this, and they informed us it was a Derbyshire Dales condition, and they couldn't enforce it. It was a Derbyshire Dales condition, and to make sure that this road was adopted and built correctly, and in conjunction with the Derbyshire County Council, right, which was never done. I pointed this out to the other gentleman on site, and he knew all about this, and he did nothing about it. This is the other planning man. The question is, this is a public highway which is used by children and everybody, and part of it is still owned by a private developer. How are you going to designate which is the bit owned by the developer and which is the bit owned by the county council? It should be adopted and done properly, and because this is a Derbyshire Dales condition that it was done. Are you going to expect all the taxpayers around here, all the council taxpayers, to pay for this to be done and repaired when it belongs to a developer that should have had it adopted? Mr. Griffiths knew all about this, and I asked this planning committee again to consider deferring this decision on this one until this bond has been paid and a legal agreement has been put in account. Thank you for your time again. I'm sorry to bring it up again, but we just didn't get an answer first time.
Thank you, Mr. Strange.
Yes, I'll just set out the what's proposed as part of the application first, but I do think it's important to come back to Mr. Strange's comments there, just to provide some clarity, because I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding in terms of what he said in his original address to members. In terms of this application, we're dealing with 2 bungalows within the central part of the development site. Again, we're dealing with matters of detail, having previously granted a hybrid permission which gave outline permission for layout, the scale, the landscaping and access arrangement. So we're dealing with appearance again here. You'll have noted from the visit yesterday and having regard to the officer's report, the extent of changes which this application seeks to make. We're happy that the appearance of the bungalows that are proposed are acceptable in a character and appearance terms. I'd suggest that, as with the previous application, given the relationship of these bungalows with the western boundary, that again a route for badgers is provided, and that appropriate gaps within the boundary treatments are provided in order to provide that alternative route for that particular species. We're happy with, as officers, that this is an acceptable form of development having regard to the scope of our consideration here and having regard to the extant permission that's in place, hence we're recommending approval of this particular application. Addressing Mr. Strange's comments, often the planning process duplicates other regimes. Now, this often happens when we're dealing with highway matters, that the highway authority will assume that if road networks are proposed to adoptable standards, that the developer will go down the adoption route. And you'll find that often conditions require that developers go down that route, and they duplicate a lot of the Section 38 requirements in terms of the details of roads and the approval process that you'd have to go through in terms of getting adoption of those roads. What appears to have happened here is that the layout is considered to be acceptable in highway safety terms and would be built to, or could be provided to adoptable standards, but for whatever reason, the developer has chosen not to go down the formal adoption route. So it would appear that we're in this odd situation where you've got some of the highway, which is within the ownership still of the applicant, which will be maintained through a management company, and then you've got the adopted part of the highway, which will be maintained by the highway authority. It's a slightly unusual arrangement, and one where you'd expect the highway authority to, given that there's a clear link between the developed part of the site and the highway, to want to ensure that that becomes part of the adopted highway network. But in planning terms, again, if there's provided an appropriate management regime in place, and maintenance of that part of the highway can be secured through the development, and that's acceptable in planning terms. But I think we probably do need to have discussion with the highway authority about the adoption of that section, given that it's clearly forms part of the, or very close to the adopted road network. they have powers to require developers to enter into formal adoption agreements. It's not something that as district council we could insist on, given that there's alternative arrangements that could be put in place, but I accept that it's not an ideal situation there.
Because it is 8:30, 2.5 hours after beginning, I do need someone to propose that we continue.
I propose that we continue.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Do I have a seconded? Councillor Slack. Thank you.
Jack, thank you, Chris, for that. We have to vote. Can we? Thank you. I'd like to just go back to Mr. Strange's condition, and that he said that we had imposed on the developer, and as I understand it, to paraphrase, he was saying that we had conditioned that the developer would have the bit of highway in Thatcher's Lane that he built adopted by the county council. Now, have we discharged that condition? And if so, how have we discharged it?
In terms of our assessment of this application, because access has been approved and we're dealing with just the dwelling house which will be served off that access, we have to have regard to the extant permission that's in place. I think in terms of the extent of the adoptable highway and that specific question, my view is that we should discuss this with the Highway Authority in terms of the specific wording. I need to look at the wording of the condition, but often what you find is that the condition will be worded in a manner that states that the road layout shall be delivered as set out in whatever drawing it is, and should be adopted through a section 38 agreement or something like that along those lines. If it says that, then it's a positively worded condition that requires a developer to do something. In terms of compliance with the condition, it puts us in a slightly difficult position in that if there's alternative management arrangements in place and it's built to adoptable standards, then in planning terms, what's the level of harm to the environment and to highway safety if there's those management arrangements in place? Is that a condition that we could effectively enforce, and would it meet the, if ultimately we decided to prosecute for non-compliance with the condition, would it meet the prosecution tests in terms of being in the public interest and other considerations? But it's something we can certainly look at. But I'd say it sits out of the scope of this application, bearing in mind the extant permissions that are in place and what we're considering this evening.
Okay. I realise that it's to do with a different planning application, but I return to this point that about enforcement, and I think there's a political view that we aren't enforcing sufficiently, and the conditions that we impose on developers, and politically that's not something for the planning committee to consider. But I would say that I would feel that politically we would wish to take this up, but in some other place, for example, the Communities and Environment Committee or full council, to encourage a greater enforcement. And I think from the parish councils around here, and particularly Tansley Parish Council, are very concerned about the lack of enforcement of conditions. And I know it's not pertinent to this particular application, but it's pertinent to all applications. And we're going to follow this one with 2 more applications, at least from this developer associated with this Thatcher's Croft, and the same issues will come up again in those two applications as are coming up now, that the road has not been adopted. It never will be adopted now, but also Thatcher's Lane changes have not been adopted. Now, turning to this particular application, the chair of Tansey Parish Council has indicated that there's a significant change in the layout of the houses, which reduces the possibility of landscaping and planting around those houses, and that will change significantly the characteristics of that particular part of the site and may have an impact on biodiversity. So can I first ask whether the biodiversity net gain that must have been required in the outline planning permission is maintained in this now that there has been a change in the layout, and secondly, is the change in, how do you consider the change in the landscaping in relationship to the change in the housing layout? And is there now sufficient landscaping to maintain the quality of the development?
Yes, this application concerns 2 bungalows in the central part of the site. The bungalows still provide for parking spaces in front of the dwellings, 2 parking spaces and an area of landscaping. The changes are relatively negligible other than a slight reduction in the amount of landscaping space at the frontage of the properties. So in landscape terms, the proposals are generally in accordance with what's previously had permission. Doesn't materially change the quality of the development in that sense, in officer's opinion. But it's a matter of judgment, and if members come to a different view on that, then they're entitled to do that. In terms of the biodiversity net gain requirements, my understanding is this came forward ahead of any requirements to deliver biodiversity net gain, and we're dealing with private garden and private space as opposed to public space where you can deliver some of those some additional habitat to deliver net gain on the development site.
Councillor Whitehead and then Councillor Butler.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I don't particularly have a major issue of this development, but I do have an issue that if we're putting conditions on planning kind of being granted, Chris, why would we have put a condition in that we couldn't legally enforce in the first place? I'm just a bit puzzled by that. I also wondered whether you could give me any clarity. One of the speakers mentioned about the road widening and that there was a bond that should have been paid or something should have been. Could you just explain that to me, because I don't understand that bit. And just going off your comments in terms of liaising with DCC highways to sort of kind of actually make sure that we've got kind of things determined in the correct way, would you not recommend a deferment rather than planning be granted until we've resolved that issue?
Yes, just addressing the condition question first. So when we go out to consultees, they'll provide us with a view on the acceptability of development within the remit, whatever their remit is, and if it's highway safety, it's highway safety matters, and they'll recommend conditions to make the development acceptable in planning terms. So a condition of that nature does one of 2 things. It provides certainty that the road layout will meet their requirements in terms of highway safety. So there's 2 strands to it, if you like. There's the delivery of the highway network in accordance with the approved plans, and then the second bit of it is more the adoption process, because either you go through the formal adoption process with the highway authority and then the highway is maintainable at public expense, or there can be other models of management which the developer in this case could legitimately explore. So it's difficult, but in terms of the expediency of taking enforcement action, we'd have to consider that in the round in terms of what management arrangements are in place, whether they achieve the same objectives, in terms of whether it would be appropriate to take formal enforcement action and eventually progress that to formal prosecution. And if those management arrangements are already in place, a judge looking at it is going to say, what are you doing here? This is not, a matter of public interest, and this is a waste of taxpayers' money, etc. So we have to be really careful in presenting reasonable cases and ensuring that the action that we take is proportionate and defendable in that respect. In terms of whether it be appropriate to defer this item, because we've already given permission to this development and the road layout, and we're only considering matters of detail. And in respect of this particular application, we're just dealing with 2 bungalows. The road network is exactly the same, so it doesn't solve that problem in terms of a deferment of this particular application.
Councillor Bottle.
Thank you very much. I've got two words here. I've got a hedgerow, and the other one that's already been dealt with Nick, which was the question about the bond. I think Miss Rains mentioned that the hedgerow had suffered somewhat. I remember the hedgerow ran down the side of Thatcher's Lane when we visited that first time. It didn't look like it does anymore. When is a hedgerow not a hedgerow? Can it be rebuilt?
Sorry, when is a hedgerow not a hedgerow? Or
when we arrived there, it looked like there was a hedgerow down the side of that field. 18 months, was it 2 years ago? And now it doesn't look like there's a hedgerow down the side of the field. But was it a hedgerow? Can I complain, or was it just like some scrubby stuff? You know, like how does I know whether or not I've lost a hedgerow?
In terms of the approved landscaping scheme, that's something we can look at. But the treatment of the boundary wall that's been erected and the hedgerow along Thatcher's Lane falls outside the scope of this application. This concerns two dwelling units within the actual site itself. But it's something we can certainly look into.
Great, thanks. And there was something else that I thought, it's not actually absolutely on point for this application, but I did actually ask Paul Wilson the other day about how we went about our enforcement and what our policy was. And who was it I actually took this to? Did I take it to scrutiny or community environment? And he said, no, just talk to the planning committee about it. The planning committee can put whatever it likes on its agenda. So if we want to put something on our agenda about enforcement, then it's up to us to do that, and then we can discuss it and consider our options. So I'm just feeding that in from something that Paul was saying anyway.
I think Kerry, our legal advisor, would like to say something.
Can I just come in on this point? And I do completely agree and support with relation to enforcement action. And I will just guide members and remind them that we do have a corporate enforcement policy. So if you go through that and read what it is that we have to comply with and what the tests that set out when we can enforce and what we should enforce, then I think we should start a conversation about what we can do when you can when you have a greater understanding of what our policy is. So yes, we do have a policy on it.
Yes, thank you.
So are there any more questions? Move to debate. Nobody? We need a recommendation. Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, so I'm happy to recommend the officer's recommendation that we accept this planning application.
With the condition about the wildlife corridor, Badger corridor, sorry.
I was not on the previous one, but happy to do it on this one as well.
Yeah, the two plots are just further up on that.
Oh, right, yeah. So with the Badger conditions.
Yeah.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sack was first. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Can you speak now? You should have put your hand up.
Put my hand up. I'd just like to say I'm concerned about the change in the housing, the size of the houses, and therefore the reduction in the space around the houses in this case, in this particular case, and so I can't support this application.
Ten-minute break? Quarter of an hour? What do we want? Minutes. 10 minutes then, please, so we can be back by 8:55.
Chair, I'll have to give my apologies I'll have to give my apologies for the rest of the meeting. Just have childcare that will be leaving at about 9:10. So rather than get into the next one, I'll leave now.
Would you like to take your seats, member? Oh. Councillor Murphy, would you like to sit down? Oh dear. Okay, I'll reopen the meeting and we move on to application 5.7 2300209 full. And this is Maynell Hunt Kennels. I'm not going to read it out. I presume everybody's seen that. Oh yes, I was going to, yeah. We do have a speaker. In fact, we've got some late reps. Shall we do those first? Let's do the late reps first. Hands up when you've read it. Read it. No. They're still reading. Shall I this man first, and then
It's just
whether he wants
to raise any issues of.
Would he like to do his comments now?
Yeah, in respect of the first.
Yeah. Okay. Here. Would you like to come and do your contribution now? I think that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Hello, Chair. Hello, good evening. Yes, I'm William Hudson. I'm making an objection, really, for the conversion of the Whelping Lodge building, which lies at the bottom of our garden. We've lived there for 28 years and bought the property for its privacy. And love the place, really, but now it's going to be possibly changed adversely. I think it will affect our garden and the privacy of our property. If it is converted, the Whelping Lodge, it will stand out like a sore thumb, we think, and look completely out of place. Planning proposal states that the alteration of the building would not adversely harm the host buildings, but it will affect us. The rear of the property has 2 ground floor windows and 4 roof lights facing our house. And obviously, it will look right down our garden, and there'll be lights on in the new building, etc. So that's my objection to the proposal. Another couple of small things is the hedges in the field which it stands. Just wondered who will maintain those, because they're getting long already. And the third point, another small one, is the drainage ditch running along the A515. It's in pretty poor condition, and it runs down towards our drive and the property, the drive at the edge of the road, and it often floods. So we just wondered if there's any provision made for the drainage and the ditch. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and apologies for getting your name wrong. So Mr. Nigel Francis, local resident, comment on the application. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also representing my neighbours, Chris and Penny Bowes, who are unable to attend this evening. We own the properties at the current entrance to the Hunt complex. We are the closest households to, and will be those most affected by the development. At present, we have a deed of easement allowing us access to our properties over the current driveway. In addition, our water, which comes via a private supply from the Sudbury estate, comes through pipes that cross the Hunt's property. The Hunt solicitors recently sent a deed of release and grant of an easement document to sign regarding the current and new driveway. However, the new agreement has a number of issues that need to be addressed, and we've been advised by our solicitor to not sign the document until our concerns are fully addressed, either with the Hunt or the new owners of the site. Our concerns include, but are not limited to, being connected to a new water supply. If not, then any present or future owners of the land our pipes cross are responsible for any maintenance of the pipes in perpetuity.
Also, as currently is the case, we have no construction, maintenance or management charges applied to any part of the development, common areas or driveway and drainage. There are also issues regarding both Chris's and our own properties that need to be sorted. Property boundaries that need to be sorted. We've asked several times for a meeting with the Hunt to discuss this, but to no avail yet. These issues are probably an aside to the actual granting of the planning permission, but we wish to make all concerned aware that we will be unable to grant the deed of release until these things are resolved. This will prevent the stopping up of the current drive and construction of the new access way as per clauses 14 and 15 of section 8 of the current planning report. However, one issue that could be resolved as part of the conditions of planning is the problem we have with surface water that flows off the paddocks and driveway and down into our garden, and more seriously, down around our neighbour's house door and our dining room outer wall. Houses sit much lower than the paddocks and current drive. As the water is unable to flow naturally to the roadside ditch and drains unaided, it makes its way down to our houses. In the event of a heavy rain, we have to open up a shallow channel we've excavated along the driveway which diverts the water to the road drain, but this has to be done every time we have any amount of rain. We would ask that permission only be granted on the condition the current driveway is either renewed when the new access way is constructed to allow proper drainage, or graded down to its original lower level and correctly drained to stop the risk of water flowing onto our properties. The level has been raised over the years by adding stone to repair potholes. Both Chris and Penny and my wife and I have no objections in principle to the granting of permission for this development to go ahead, and actually we think it's beneficial to the historic site and the architectural importance of the building. However, we would like the issues we have regarding our excess water supply and the drainage of the site be taken into consideration so as not to devalue our properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, did you hear that? I've got a loud voice. You didn't hear it? Right, sorry. So the applicant and the agent intend to share the allocated 5-minute slot. The agent will speak first, that's Mr. Scott Odell, and then the Honourable David Lee on behalf of the trustees of the Mainall and South Staffordshire Hunt, who's the applicant. So their representations will be made in relation to both 23000209 full and 23000210 LBALT. The reason for this, and I'm very grateful for that, is to avoid duplication. So, Mr. Odell, please. Thank you.
Thank you to members for the opportunity to speak in support of our applications before you tonight.
Yeah, sorry, just to confirm, 2.5 minutes, you're happy with that? Okay.
Thank you to members for the opportunity to speak in support of our applications before you tonight. These are for the conversion of the Mainall Hunt stables, kennels and whelping lodge to 9 dwellings. I welcome the recommendation for approval, where the officer's report is well written, setting out clearly why the application should be permitted, whilst taking into account the representations made. The proposal will secure a positive future for a group of listed buildings which make a notable contribution to the character of the area. This will ensure they remain in a good state of repair and for future generations to enjoy. Policy supports the reuse of buildings in rural locations such as this, especially where they make such a positive contribution in terms of their character. For the reasons that are set out in the officer's report, an affordable housing contribution is not required by policy for this particular development and is therefore not proposed. However, the proposal will see a net increase of 6 market dwellings, which will contribute positively to the council's housing land supply. The scheme will also deliver mostly 3-bed opposed to 4-bed properties, which will help improve housing options locally. The buildings are of national importance, built in the 1870s, and working with the council, we have put forward a sympathetic scheme which sees minimal intervention. The external changes are very limited and also involve the removal of modern additions. Existing staircases and historic elements such as the original stable partitions will also remain legible following conversion. Sustainability in addressing climate change is incredibly important, although here this does have to be balanced carefully with potential harm to the listed building. The proposal is inherently sustainable as a result of reusing existing fabric. Full details for fabric improvements to enhance thermal efficiency are conditioned alongside a detailed scheme of measures to mitigate the effects of an adaptation to climate change. This will ensure the matter is appropriately addressed prior to the conversion of the building. A comment was received in relation to the impact the conversion of the Whelping Lodge will have on the neighbouring amenity. This has been considered within the officer's report, and I support the conclusion that there will be no adverse impact as there is a well-established boundary and the Whelping Lodge is some distance from the neighbouring dwelling. Other representations have been made in relation to legal matters concerning rights of access and water. These are not considered to be planning matters. However, I wanted to reassure members that this is being progressed with the neighbours and understand it is moving towards final stages of being agreed. Another significant benefit of the scheme is that this will also deliver a safer point of access for existing dwellings, as well as those proposed with much improved visibility onto the public highway. I therefore urge members to follow the recommendation before you and grant full planning permission and listed building consent subject to the conditions set out. Thank you for your time, and I'll hand over to the applicant.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I'm one of the 3 trustees of the Mennell and South Staffordshire Hunt. Our role is to ensure that the assets of the Mennell and South Staffs Hunt are applied to best use and in accordance with the objects of the organisation. I live 2 miles from the property and have driven past it almost daily for over 40 years. For reasons that members of this planning committee will be aware of, attitudes to the use of the countryside for leisure have changed hugely in recent years, probably irreversibly. The magnificent set of stables, kennels and living accommodation built by Lord Vernon around 1877 to the design of George Davy, a noted Victorian architect, were a triumphal celebration to the sport of hunting then in its heyday. The premises have been loved and preserved by successive masters and committees and are largely intact, but they are now redundant and lie vacant. They are in crying need for a renaissance and a repurposing to serve the needs and tastes of the 21st century. Plans for the conversion of the premises were initially drawn up nearly 20 years ago. The proposals before you this evening are the result of nearly 3 years of debate and consultation. At all times, we wish to acknowledge the heritage of the property and its Grade 2 listed status, and to design a scheme which would respect its historical associations, firstly with Lord Vernon's Sudbury estate, and secondly the sport of hunting, and yet to be a more than pleasant place to live. I wish to pay tribute to the sympathetic and supportive involvement of the planning officers here at Derbyshire Dales and the conservation officer. Great thought has been given to the design of a new and safe access to the property, the provision of services, the retention of distinctive period features, and to respecting a living countryside. Changes to external appearance will be positive with the removal of functional 20th century additions and restoration of greater visibility and prominence to areas somewhat deprioritized in recent decades. The trustees are delighted that the scheme is recommended for approval, and we hope that members will vote in favour. This is a magnificent property with a prospect of a fantastic future. I commend the application to you.
And apologies for your long wait this evening. Adam, this is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this application is for the conversion of the buildings, which I think most, if not all, members saw yesterday, and the creation of a new access and some erection of some new garages at the back of the site. The site is in open countryside, north of Sudbury and west of the A515, and comprises several listed buildings, as has been set out eloquently by the speakers. Proposals for the conversion to 9 dwellings. There are 3 existing dwellings in the buildings, and therefore it's a net or additional 6 dwellings will be created. The conversion is within the shell of the existing buildings and is proposed in a sensitive manner with minimal alterations, and retention of historic elements, such as stores and staircases, and the application is considered to be in accordance with relevant policies and is recommended for approval. Concerns been raised in regard to impact upon amenity, particularly in relation to overlooking from the Whelping Lodge, which is the building to the north there. Members saw the Whelping Lodge on site and in relation to the neighbouring property, which is some distance away, although the Whelping Lodge is located on the boundaries of the garden of that property. There would be windows and roof lights to the elevation facing that, but the windows there's a very substantial boundary treatment of hedges between, which would prevent overlooking from the windows, and the roof lights are positioned quite high above the roof slope. So my view as a planning officer, especially given the distance to the neighbouring property itself, is that there wouldn't be any significant overlooking. And there was a point raised about who would maintain landscaping. There is a condition about landscaping on the application, and it will be possible to consider additional planting if necessary as part of that. In my view, that the existing treatment provides quite a significant barrier and prevents overlooking. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor Slack.
Would the be permanent lettings? It wouldn't be holiday lets, the permanent lettings.
Yeah, all dwellings proposed are permanent market
lettings,
houses.
yeah. Thank you.
Views?
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible to condition the degrading or lowering the grading of the original road surface so that the water can disperse that is currently going into the neighbouring cottages can be dispersed, or is that beyond the scope of this application?
I mean, the existing access and the impacts of the paddock and the existing driveway in terms of surface water drainage is an existing situation. So I think we have to consider what the impacts of this development would be upon that. But I don't think it would be unreasonable to require the development to provide appropriate drainage within that section. I think mention was also made to surface water drainage along the A515, and obviously that would be within the highway boundary, would be beyond the realms of this application. But I mean, generally speaking, the application is conversion of existing buildings, and there isn't any significant additional hardstanding proposed apart from that new access track. So additional surface water runoff will be minimal in my view. But in any case, an appropriate drainage scheme of infiltration is proposed. But if members thought it necessary, yes, a specific condition could be imposed requiring consideration of how surface water runoff from the track could be mitigated.
Councillor Buttle.
Thank you, Adam. Madam Chair. Go on then. I've got a question. If this is, it is a listed building, does it kind of exist as a listedness from the exterior only? Like, can we ask that solar panels are put facing into the courtyard, for example?
There is a condition requiring climate change mitigations. In terms of the listing, no, the listing covers the building, well, externally and internally, but the internal faces of the courtyard would be quite significant in this case, in my view. And in my view, as a planning officer with experience of listed buildings, it's not going to be appropriate to put solar panels upon the building itself. However, there may well be scope for other microgeneration. For example, you could have air source heat pumps appropriately sited in enclosures, so they have appropriately designed. You could have a ground source heat pump potentially. Obviously, there's a paddock there. You could have solar panels in a ground-mounted array if you could put them off in a corner and screen them. So there are definitely options, and we'd be looking at all those as part of that condition.
Oh, excellent. I'm really pleased to hear that. What about solar tiles? Would they be acceptable?
We'd have to look at the technology at the time, I think. But the roof and the tiles are historic fabric as well, so it's not just necessarily about the appearance.
Yeah, I noticed the tiles are already there, and there will be some work needing doing on the roof.
Yeah.
So I was wondering whether or not that was something that
they might be more acceptable than panels, but we'd have to see exactly how they would look, and have to look very carefully at that.
So, are we looking at getting quite a green building by the time we're finished, or are we looking at something which is just going to be good enough?
I think it will be as green as it can be. The good or positive aspect of this development is that reusing historic buildings in a sensitive manner is inherently a sustainable thing to do. It conserves something which is important for the nation, part of our history, and provides a development which is needed in the district. But in terms of energy performance, we will be seeking to achieve as much as is possible within conservation realms. It's not going. I don't think it would be as well performing as a modern new building, but it would be as good as it can be.
I remember walking round with you, and you were rather keen on the maintaining the utilitarian interior condition, as it were. So that would mean not having internal insulation, is that right?
You would have to have internal insulation. What, in basic terms, plasterboard, for example, which is what you'd conventionally use, would give you a very clean finish, which on the inside a lot of those buildings would look inappropriate. It'd look like a modern building on the inside if you took that approach. But there are different technologies available and different insulation you can use, which is thinner and which can have a different finish, which is more appropriate for listed buildings, but still are thermally well performing. So that's what we're talking about.
Great, thank you very much. Those are pretty much all the things I wanted to ask. I like the idea of an external ground-mounted array, because you could pop that almost anywhere, couldn't you? And that'd be lovely.
Councillor Boothroyd.
So my understanding of this development is that it's a sort of semi-communal courtyard, and it's a sort of community that's built up around the existing courtyard. But from what I can understand, there's no communal amenity in regard to things like cycle storage or things like the ground source heat pump idea, which I think on a individual two bedroom sort of development, it wouldn't be sustainable. But looking at it as an entire communal development, is there opportunities here to essentially create greener opportunities, not just in relation to the individual infrastructure? So essentially, there's no cycle parking, as far as I can tell, built into this.
There is cycle parking within the garages.
Are they individually owned? Are they going to be sold, though, as part of?
Yeah, they'd
one
be
property
available
or
for the owners of those garages,
Yeah.
I think. I mean, there could be scope for a cycle storage, it's like a communal storage building amongst those buildings. I think if members wanted to see that happen, there possibly would be a justification for details of that. And in that part of the site, I think that could be accommodated there. In terms of ground source heat pump, yes, in principle, I think there is scope for something there, and that obviously that would be a system which would serve the whole development. And that's something which, you know, I'd welcome the applicant to explore.
So, are there any more questions? Councillor Dunn.
Thank you. In the context of the comments by the our Director of Housing, he understands that this should fall within the remit of a affordable housing contribution, but I believe there is currently no suggestion that that will be true. Could you clarify?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Dobbs. This issue is set out in detail in the report. So bear with me a second. So I would ask members to look at paragraph 7.62 onwards, which sort of deals with the issue in detail. The council has a rural designation, and for this site being outside of the three main settlements. And in these circumstances, the National Planning Policy Framework says that local planning authorities can lower the threshold when you can ask for affordable housing to 5 if a policy has been adopted, and that's the issue at hand. The advice, well, we've had council opinions submitted by the applicant, which we've looked at and consulted with the policy manager, and the view is that the council does not have an adopted policy which sets that lower threshold. So the policy that we do have is HC4 as it's written in the local plan, which requires all the residential developments of 11 dwellings or more to provide affordable housing. And obviously in this case we are below that threshold. But further to that, the paragraph of the NPPF which allows us to set a lower threshold also states in its supporting text that in cases to support the reuse of brownfield land, where vacant buildings are being reused or redeveloped, affordable housing contributions should be reduced by a proportionate amount. And then obviously in this case, the whole development is coming forward as a conversion of disused redundant buildings, brownfield land. So the same part of the MPPF which would allow us potentially to lower our threshold also says that we shouldn't be applying that here in any case. So the view as officers is that it wouldn't be policy compliant to require affordable housing in this case. So the proposal as submitted with no affordable housing is in accordance with the development plan.
Thank you. Could I just add what should have happened then for the previous statement that we could regard it as a situation to be our policy? Does that make sense? What should we have done and when can we do it?
I'll answer this to the best of my ability. We shouldn't have effectively introduced a policy through an interim policy note in the manner that we did. There's a requirement to rigorously test new policies, consider the implications of them in viability terms, consider them in the round, and there's a requirement to carry out appropriate engagement with key stakeholders as well to get their views on the policies. So the way in which we went about introducing the interim policy wouldn't be sound in law, and that's been confirmed by a KC opinion that's been submitted by the applicant in this particular case. So we need to adopt a specific policy as part of any review of the local plan, which is evidence-based and fully tested in accordance with guidance in terms of how we prepare and adopt plans.
Thank you, Chris. So, if there are Councillor Frank.
Just thinking again about the Whelping Lodge, would it be possible to have the roof lights moved to the other side of the building instead of the side which overlooks the garden?
It would be possible. My view, it wouldn't be necessary. Given the very significant distance to the neighbouring property, I don't think there would be any reasonable argument that there could be overlooking or any significant loss of privacy. And given the boundary treatment, the concern about moving it to the front is that it has a much greater visual impact, because the other side of the building is what you will see in the context of the listed buildings, which is why the preference was for any roof lights to go on the rear roof slope.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the roof lights, they'd have to be in a Victorian types where they built them out as a roof rather than roof lights, modern roof lights. Would you agree, Adam?
I think they should be conservation type.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and there's a condition to agree details.
Yeah,
on that.
it wouldn't look right to put modern roof lights somewhere.
Just a question. It seems from the drawing that they are just modern Velux lights, and there's holes in the roof a bit, isn't it? My question on the slight climate change question on that. From the look of it, currently the roof lights are on the north-facing side of the building rather than the south-facing side. So, in positioning of windows with regard to heat retention and heat loss, it's better to have them on the south-facing side of a roof, I believe. Correct. So it's very much a conservation thing for the sake of.
Yeah, it's definitely about the look of the building and how to, as far as possible, to maintain its current appearance.
Okay.
Questions? I'm going to move on to debate. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I take on point what your comments just made on the roof lights. Obviously, there'll be conservation roof lights with the bar down the middle of them, so they look old to match in, basically. I've been travelling this road past this property for all my life, and I was amazed yesterday at the extent of these buildings and the historical look of them, and it'd be a shame to let these deteriorate anymore. So I'm in full support of this application, and I'll move it for recommendation, Chair.
Sorry, I'd like to make an amendment to that, that in line with what's been said earlier, that we apply two conditions, one for additional planting between the Whelping Lodge and Parkside Farm South to improve the privacy. And secondly, again, as suggested, to condition an appropriate drainage scheme for the premises at the entrance.
Adam,
The
do
current
you need-
entrance, that is.
Do you need to comment on that, or shall I ask the mover and the seconder whether they are in agreement?
No,
Before put it to the vote?
I can turn it into planning speak. I think we can have conditions to secure that, yeah.
So are the mover and the seconder happy with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, happy with that, Chair. I think that'll happen automatically with moving the entrance further up the road anyway. So yeah, happy with that.
Can I just ask one more question? Will the interiors be in Victorian rather than modern? They won't be modern, will they?
You mean decoration or in terms
Yeah,
of...
inside.
Well, decorations we don't have that much control over, furniture and things like that. But in terms of the floors and the walls and the ceilings and the retention of the stalls and the staircases and everything else that members saw on site, they will be retained, and the drive there will be to retain the character of the buildings as far as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gem, really, isn't it?
So it has been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So we move on to 5.8, application number 2300210, which is a listed building application. I don't think we have any speakers. Mr. Hodson, you're happy that you've made your points? Thank you. Thank you. Adam again, please.
Happy to answer any questions. This application's for the related works for the application that's just been considered.
Councillor Buttle.
Thank you very much. This is a listing wouldn't stop us from lifting the floor and putting kingspan down and putting the stone back down with a bit of underfloor heating, would it?
Well, you'd require listed building consent for those works, but in my experience, ground floor heating can be quite a good solution for listed buildings. Yeah, normally what you do if you've got an original, like a stone floor, like some of these buildings, as you record how it's laid, you'd take it up and then you'd excavate, put in your, possibly you could have underfloor heating, which works quite well with listed buildings, and then your insulation, and then put the floor back. What's important is the floor gets put back in the same pattern and at the same level that it was. But it is possible to do it, yeah.
Yeah, I thought the floors were worth looking after. Thank you. That's very reassuring.
So any more questions from members? No? Move to the debate then. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Lees, do I get a seconder? Councillor Boothroyd?
Yeah, happy to second.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? If not, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please show. It's unanimous. Thank you. So moving on to application 5.9, which is 2300959, listed building, various proposed works at Marketplace and Victoria Square, Ashbourne. I don't think we've got any late reps on that, so we go to Mr. Croft, who's the agent. Oh, Councillor Hughes is disappearing. Is he coming back? Oh, of course, yes, yes. No. So is everybody here who intends to be here?
There's only seven members, okay.
Is 7 members okay?
Yeah, we need a third.
Yeah, I think there's 15 on this planning committee. Well, I don't know, that's what I counted, but we're okay, are we? Yeah? Okay, so, Mr. Croft, who's the agent, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. My name's Zach Croft. I'm the planning agent representing the applicant for this application for listed building consent. As you are aware, this forms a part of the wider Ashbourne Reborn project, which will make a series of highways and public realm improvements to the town centre of Ashbourne, as well as the development of Ashbourne Methodist Church into a multi-purpose community hub. The setting of the historic town centre is currently undermined by road traffic. The Ashbourne Reborn project aims to reduce the dominance of traffic by redesigning the vehicle carriageways and increasing the space and quality of pedestrian routes, as well as the areas that surround them. The main benefits of these works applied for by this application is the provision of new street furniture and trees in Marketplace and Victoria Square, and the removal of car parking, allowing the public to better use these spaces. As set out in the case officer's report, the public benefits arising from the works far outweigh the less than substantial harm caused to the listed surfaces. The works will enhance both areas through the removal of parking provision and through the removal of car parking and provision of street furniture and trees, whilst also retaining their historic character and appearance, and it will be better used by the general public. The works will also enhance the character and appearance of this part of Ashbourne Conservation Area. On this basis, I encourage members to approve the application in line with case officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, members? Oh, sorry, Chris, this is yours. Yeah, sorry.
I will very briefly just introduce this item. As mentioned by the applicant or the agent on behalf of the applicant, this application relates to the Ashbourne Reborn project, which has government funding through the Levelling Up programme. The application specifically includes the removal of the car park into Marketplace and the associated removal of the thermoplastic lines, provision of a disabled bay and 3 short stay car parking spaces, repairs to existing limestone sets and sandstone flagstones, introductions of new areas of stone surfacing to areas of tarmac, installation of new electricity points for events, some uplighters and bollards, removal of existing and provision, installation of new street furniture to both areas and provision of new trees and associated tree pits. All of these proposals seek to enhance this area both in public realm terms but also in terms of accessibility. As you'll note from the officer's report, in general terms we're satisfied that the proposals constitute an enhancement of the services both in terms of retaining historic character and appearance. We feel that there is no harm to adjacent listed buildings and would enhance the character and appearance of the Ashbourne Conservation Area. In terms of the harm to the listed surfaces themselves, where we've identified harm, that harm is at the lower end of less than substantial harm, and we as officers consider there are significant and substantial public benefits to be derived in this case, hence why we're recommending support of the application. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Boothroyd.
I just have one question, which I don't think I asked yesterday, about the 3 parking spaces that are being retained plus the disabled parking space. Will they be EV charging points, seeing as we're putting sort of electricity throughout the marketplace, or are they just going to be standard?
The proposal is for standard parking bays, but there will be services provided to that area of the car parking is something that could potentially be explored, but they are proposed to be standard spaces. And with electric charging points, you have associated infrastructure, which you've got to consider in terms of the impact potentially on the listed surface and setting of other heritage assets.
Members? If not, I'll move to the debate. Councillor Franks.
Again, from the site visit yesterday, we were talking about accessibility for the wheel. If you had disabled car parking space, there didn't seem to be any way somebody in a wheelchair from that disabled car could get up the steps. There was no plan for a ramp at that top end. They'd have to go all around the square to do quite a circuit to use the shops and facilities on top of the steps.
Yes, that is something that was raised on the site visit yesterday. There's a need in this particular instance to balance the historic the impact on the historic environment and the integrity of the marketplace surface. So the steps are an integral part of that surface. And there is access at either end of that run of shops for disabled persons, and we feel that that level of access is acceptable whilst maintaining the integrity and the special character and appearance of the listed marketplace surface.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to move officers' recommendations.
I'll second that, Chair. I'll second that, Chair. I think it's a great project and a lot of history there in Victoria Square. We got there at last. We got there.
Oh no, it's still there. Escape, Peter.
Yeah. Just the.
So we move on to item 6, which is the appeals progress report. Do you want to make some comments on this, Chris? Or are there any questions from members?
I'll move it then, Chair.
But before we move it, Chair, I'd like to, with Councillor Murphy, move a motion as follows. It's concerning, following the appeal decision for concerning the land in Holland Ward. It's noted as big in, I think, on the planning application, and it concerns the additional 15 houses in a field next to a recently developed housing development where access is provided over what was a private driveway and will become a carriageway, a highway to these 15 houses. The original driveway was a shared driveway for about four houses, and was constrained by a window which jutted out very close to the highway, and was effectively a constraint on vehicle movements on that highway. And the concern that the planning, this came to planning twice, and in both cases it was turned down, and it was turned down on safety grounds, because the users of the driveway would now be subject to additional vehicles, first of all from the development, and secondly from the use of the highway for residents and for visitors and for deliveries and so on. And the particular issue was the safety of children who might play out at the front of the group of houses, and perhaps would have been using the driveway or run out onto the driveway. And while it was serving just 4 houses, with the additional 15 houses, the committee believed that this constituted a hazard, and the development was refused on those grounds. And the inspector chose not to agree with the committee and approved the development. So I would like to propose the following motion when we note the planning inspectorate decisions. So Derbyshire Dales District Council Planning Committee requests that the chair of the planning committee writes to the head of the planning inspectorate and the planning inspector who conducted the appeal, noting the committee's disappointment with the decision reached, and noting further its disappointment that the inspector did not consider the rights of children to play safely in their front gardens. When playing, children, and particularly small children, are often oblivious to traffic dangers. The danger to children in changing a private shared drive into a highway is manifest and should have been given due weight in coming to a decision instead of ignoring it.
Chris, can we ask for your considered advice on this one, please? And then I will ask you, Terry, if that's all right.
I mean, I'm happy, as an officer, I'm happy to accept that motion. From experience, having raised concerns with the planning inspectorate, the default position tends to be that someone in their administration team will write to us to say, we acknowledge your position on this. You have a right of challenge of our decision through judicial review proceedings, and that's what they direct us to. I don't think we're going to get more detailed response than that, unfortunately, but it doesn't stop us from, trying if you feel that you want to make those concerns, you want to raise those concerns.
I think it's raising the concerns with this particular inspector, and that's really what we're driving at.
Okay.
Well, I'm happy to take comments on this one. Although I perhaps need the advice of Kerry first. Are you happy with what we're proposing to do?
Yeah, I'm not proposing any advice.
Okay.
I'm just kind of this isn't a position that have been in, that basically that you're complaining against the decision of a planning inspectorate. So I have gone onto their website and they do have a complaints procedure. If it is what you're saying, a complaint about a particular inspector, then I suppose there is that option open to the council to to explore, but it's not something that I've ever that I've got detailed knowledge of.
Can I ask you then, Kerry, who would do that? Who would instigate the complaints procedure?
Sure, I don't know, and I don't wish to not sort of answer the question.
Is the first thing then to debate this motion and come to a decision? Councillor Murphy.
Right.
I'm just trying to get the procedure right on this one.
Okay.
I don't think we've ever seen this before.
No, I don't think I ever have. Thanks, Chair. I'd like to second this motion. I thought we were on quite safe ground here. This application was tested twice, in reality, and the health and safety of the children playing outside their properties, people walking on that access road. One had to question how safe it was going to be. I think we should write and we should make our feelings felt, but I fundamentally believe that really it's a gesture on our part. But I'll tell you what, the local people who are very disappointed by this outcome, and it was a thorough report that came back from the inspectorate, but they would be very grateful for us making this representation. Thank you, Chair.
Can I come back? Yeah, I feel that we're not complaining about the process, and I think a complaint would be about the process. We're complaining about we're making a point about the judgment, and I think that is a different matter, and I think it would therefore not be covered by the complaints procedure.
Kerry.
Yeah, I thought you might say that, and just within there it's saying that if you're making a legal challenge, you must do so in the High Court. So that's I was easing you in gently, you see, so that not straight away, but yeah, those are the options to us, that it will be the same sort of element as a judicial review if someone was reviewing our decision. So it's quite a I'm not saying, certainly not saying no, but just giving you a full idea of the level that you'd have to take it to the High Court.
So I, for one, am happy to support this motion. Do we need a vote then from members in support? So can I take the vote then? All those in favour? Anybody against? Abstention? Yeah. Okay, that is carried. So we have two co-chairs and a vice-chair, and I notice in your motion it mentions the chair. Do you mean the two co-chairs? Or have you got one chair in mind? I wasn't the chair when this was debated, but I won't be writing it anyway, will I, to be honest, because I'm sorry, it'll be over to you. I mean, I can put my name to it. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Or you could... Yeah, surely be more than that. Are you happy for me to sign it? Because I'm not the chair. I'm the chair tonight, but I'm not the chair. Okay? No, I'll sign it. Yeah.
I'd like to say I told you so in the officers recommended approval of that particular item. And I think the tests in policy terms are clearly set out in the appeal decision. Unfortunately, the legislation that we work within is very much geared towards housing development and development generally. And you'll note there's a particular sentence in the decision that was made that talks about the specific part of the MPPF, which, if I find it, paragraph 111 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires that proposals are refused on highway grounds if there would be unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. So there's two strands to that, but for us to demonstrate there's unacceptable impact on highway safety, I think from experience and my understanding of this particular case, I think we'd be better to have had some evidence of that and some competent authority, whether it's a highway engineer that was appointed by committee or some backing from a highway expert. Because it's as harsh as it seems, members aren't professionals in respect of technical matters such as highway safety. And if the highway authority is saying the development's acceptable in highway safety terms, it'd be quite a bold inspector to go against that advice without the evidence.
That is so true.
No, we managed to successfully, there wasn't an award of cost against the council, but there was no application made by the applicant. So that does indicate that the recommendation or the resolution was a reasonable one in that respect. Yeah. It was the same applicant, but there were slightly different proposals. And proposals, if you remember, a narrowing of the carriageway, which required agreement from residents, which they couldn't obtain. So they were effectively relying really on the outcome of the appeal in respect to the first application. And we have got a full application in which proposes the same access arrangements, will be coming before members in the near future. It was only an outline application. Yes, so all that will be a consideration in respect to the new full application, which will consider the whole thing afresh, but we have to have regard to that decision that's been made.